All right, folks, appreciate you being here. Tuesday night is turning into another night for the voice of college football. So we know that you'll want to be here each and every Tuesday night because here in just a couple of weeks, we will not just check out the rankings that actually make sense. We'll check out the rankings that count. Unfortunately, the rankings that count from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. It's been a good time. It's been a fun time, a productive time, beneficial time, and a very popular time for all of us to get together in previous seasons. I think we started this 2 seasons ago. It might have been in 2020, maybe 2019, where we started to go live on Tuesday night with the College Football Playoff Selection Committee when the rankings get released and watch it with you. And we get a huge crowd in here and we talk about the rankings immediately. But until we get to that time, which I believe is in 2 weeks, because this being October 4th, that sounds right about the time mid-October that the selection committee gets to work. So they only have 2 more games. They only have 2 more games to observe these teams before they're going to release their rankings that are supposed to be resume rankings. They're supposed to be resume rankings. Can you imagine? I would love right now to see a college football playoff selection committee ranking. I would love to see where they have Kansas, for example. So until then, and then we'll have to move this show. We'll move it wherever. Maybe do this on Monday night where we do the top 25 that actually makes sense reaction show. The reason we do this on a Tuesday night is I typically release the top 25 that actually makes sense sometime on Sunday. So I want to give everybody 2.5 days to absorb it, get as many comments in, and then go live with the show. So appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. And this is all about you and your response to the top 25 that actually makes sense. A lot of people a little slow to the party, a little slow to the objective, a little slow to the approach, the mindset, the thinking that actually the games on the field count. How about that? Not a perfect ranking, not flawless, because there has to be an evaluation of how good the teams are, but at least it's based on the results on the field. You can't be Oklahoma State in our ranking. You can't be Oklahoma State prior to last weekend and defeat the likes of Arizona State and a couple other throwaway games, Central Michigan and somebody else, and be ranked number 7 or 8 in the country. That doesn't make any sense. They've not proven anything. They have not shown us that they're a top 10 team in the nation. Now, of course, after 1 week, has anyone shown us to be a top 10 team in the nation? No. But based on that one sample size of one game, yes, there were teams that showed us to be a top 10 team at that point. Because based on what the opportunity was, they cashed in. Georgia beat Oregon. Florida beat Utah. So, but there are just many examples of why these other polls and rankings make absolutely no sense. Again, I cite Oklahoma State as a prime example. Through 3 games, they hadn't beaten anyone. Arizona State was the best team by far they had beaten. And they only won that game. It wasn't like they went out and beat Arizona State 50-0, 34-17. So it was a 1-score game in the 4th quarter. And they're ranked 7th or 8th in the country. You know why they were ranked, Oklahoma State, 7th or 8th in the country after 3 or 4 weeks of doing nothing? You know why? Because in the preseason, in the off season, they were highly ranked. So imagine this. And detractors of our rankings, be honest. Go through this exercise and be honest with yourself. Take the Oklahoma State example. First 3 weeks of the season, they beat an FCS, Central Michigan, Arizona State, but they were ranked by the AP and the Coaches Bowl 7th or 8th in the country. Why? Because, again, they made the Big 12 championship game last year. They won the Sugar Bowl. They won Oklahoma State. They won the Fiesta Bowl over Notre Dame. They were expected to do well this season. Okay, they hadn't done anything. So you take the same Oklahoma State team and you give them the same record and the same results against the same opponents, but in a year in which they started unranked, and you know what? They'd still be unranked. That is the true litmus test right there. Go back to 2019. Look up our videos from 2019. For some of the critics and detractors again, I'll cite this one. Who was the first person in America to rank LSU number 1 in 2019? I'll tell you, right here. Right here. So LSU started the season on the fringe of the top 10 with the coaches and the AP poll and others out there. They were coming off 10-3 the year before, won the Peach Bowl, Fiesta Bowl against UCF. And so they were considered, good team, really good team, talented team, but not a serious contender for the national championship. Joe Burrow threw 16 touchdowns. So LSU was considered to be a third or fourth best team in the SEC. So even after they started to win these impressive games early, they went on the road and beat Auburn. They beat Texas in a Saturday night showdown. Well, I immediately reviewed the resume, the track record, the performance. LSU, number 1. I believe I had them number 1 after 2 weeks. Everybody else still had them 8th, 9th. This was in 2019. And again, I'm not predicting ahead. I am ranking the teams based on the resume, based on the performance on the field. Okay? I think some people don't necessarily make their rankings a prediction, but they also just don't rank them based on what happened on the field. They mix that with their perception. And maybe I'll do it this week. Maybe I'll list the top 25 teams in the country according to me, according to just what I believe, what I think. We'll do that at some point. That'll completely confuse certain people. But we appreciate you all being here, and I will drop the link in the chat. Should have already done that. Should have already done that. So the way we work it on Tuesday night is, first and foremost, we focus on the top 25 that actually makes sense and your response to it. And what I really want, regulars, I love you. I want you here all the time. We'll talk. Absolutely. But what I want are the critics to show up. Want the critics to show up. That's what I want. I am looking for the critics to show up. And before we get to our first conversation, we are going to run down some of the comments that have been posted because we want to, again, honor the intent for the show first and foremost. Then we'll just talk about college football and whatever you want. So let's get to the comments right here. So I have graciously invited the critics, the haters, the trolls, whatever you want to call them, to join our show tonight. Please call. And if you can't make it on Tuesday, some have said, well, Mark, I got a life. I'm not here on Tuesday. Okay. We're live on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. We're live all over the place. My goodness. Call anytime. All right. J-Dub shines in right away. I hope all of you can see that because I have to go to a different tab, a different screen to scroll, so I can't see exactly what you guys are seeing. So J-Dub, Mark giving Clemson respect based on results. Yes, I am just basically citing that Clemson, in my opinion, based on my judgment, evaluation, is the 2 best wins in the country right now. The both based on the opponents more than anything based on Wake Forest and NC State and how good I believe they are. And then also based on the dominance for most of the game, the control of the game that they showed, game control against North Carolina State. The other games that they played, I find Louisiana Tech and Furman not to really matter. Now, if Clemson had only won those games 28-24, yeah, that's a knock against them, but they didn't crush them 60-0, but they won comfortably. And then the Georgia Tech game wasn't the most impressive in week 1, but they still won 41-10. Troop 75, I like the movement my pack can make the next 2 weeks with at home against Florida State and Syracuse. So, Troop 75, I'm glad that you're still optimistic about your team. That's what I take from that comment. I'm glad that you're still optimistic about NC State coming off a tough loss and pretty much being pushed around there in the second half. Dustin Miller looks good. Only issue is Georgia at 3, but the rest makes sense according to the criteria. Great job, Mark. Keep it up, brother. Thank you so much for that, Dustin. I appreciate that. And again, I have no issue with people disagreeing with the 25. Oh man, I wish that we could come up with a good number. I want to do like 37 or the top 19 or 41. Nothing special about 25. So the only thing I don't know here from Dustin is whether he believes Georgia should be higher than 3 or lower than 3. I got comments in that, of course, Georgia's still number 1 or 2. But then I also got comments in that look at the way they played the last 2 weeks. They should be 10. So I don't know from that what we're looking at from Dustin. Mushu 420 says, great list, Mark. Thank you. Pauline, I like it. Said every Clemson fan ever. So that's a bit of a knock, I believe, but that's fine. Rhino Hunter, my UW Huskies were not in prime form against UCLA, but I kind of agree with your rankings, except Bama, maybe up a spot, and Georgia down a spot or 2. I could argue UW in the top 25, but the season is still young. Yes, you could argue at 4-1, but the Michigan State win has been downgraded significantly, not just based on how good I believe Michigan State is, but again, just taking the results on the field. That Michigan State win by Washington has plummeted. They got trounced by Minnesota. They lost by 2 scores against Maryland. Gaming Tremor. Thought that was gamer there for a second. My apologies. Gaming Tremor. I love these videos. Keep them coming. Tony, Ohio State fan, no problem with where we're going. You improve as the years go on. See you Tigers win. Stop it. Kansas number 1. Let's go Jayhawks. Yeah, they could have been number 1. I considered it. Chris, I appreciate you. Go Blue. Appreciation from a Michigan fan. That does my heart good. Love it. Calvin, Kansas has some good wins, but they are all against unranked teams. That's the first problem with your statement there, Calvin. Against unranked teams, meaning unranked teams from the system that you're looking at over here with the AP and the coaches poll. And I guess even unranked in my rankings, but I don't cut it off as ranked wins are good wins. All the other wins aren't good wins. No, the number 25 team in the country is not separated by much, if any, from the number 35 team in the country. Kansas at 2, adorable, isn't it? Nathan, I like that number 1. Yes, Clemson. All, let's see, after yesterday's game and with the hoping of getting all starters back. Shane would just swap Penn State and Michigan. Job 1925. Finally, Mark, one that I can agree with. Way to go, bud. So I finally got it right. Lindell, you're the man. Appreciate that, Lindell. Harry, good job. Southeast, not much resistance here at this point. I'd prefer it if you dropped Ohio State more down your list every week. Go Bucks. Okay. Mike, this one actually does make sense. I was astounded when I saw this from Mike Luca, who has been a basher of the system. I'll read a few more and then we'll get to the calls. Nick Garrett, good job, Mark. I'd like to see Michigan in the top 5. They'll get there if they win games against good teams. Who does Michigan have this week? Indiana, probably not going to help them much, but also consider this is one of the other fallacies of the people that respond and criticize that don't completely understand. They look at one team, like they're isolated on their team, think, okay, my team is NC State. Okay, we did this, therefore we should go up 3 spots or we should go. Well, other things are happening with other teams playing better teams than you or worse teams than you, constantly change. And then all the previous, think of this. This is what's not taken into consideration by the other rankings. All the previous games have to be reevaluated. We don't get stuck with whatever the performance was and the result against that team 4 weeks ago. Well, it's a different deal now. It has to be evaluated much differently. Butch says 2 losses to 2 unranked teams back to back. I don't know. There is no justification for the AP to have Oklahoma. Is Oklahoma? They're not still ranked in that other poll, are they? For anybody to rank Oklahoma in the top 25, any of their writers, they should revoke their votes. Mike says, go blue. Never mind. How is Nebraska not in this? Ha, ha, ha. Bo, Kansas at number 2 is a troll. Yes, they should be in the top 25, but they play TCU. Okay. Yes, they're playing TCU coming up. That doesn't count. We truly don't know if they will be in it for the long haul. No, we don't. We're not ranking the long haul. We're ranking right now. The reasonable Gump. Going off Mark's logic about performance in games, I do not understand his top 5. Clemson has not looked good or dominant at all. They have the better wins, though. All right, let's get to your calls because you're all here. Let's get it cranked up here. The voice of college football. Chris is on the line. Chris, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I don't want to critique your poll, Mark. I don't really feel like that's my job. I was going to ask you, though, and I'm not trying to really push anything on you, but, what I do, and I've already told you, and I don't want to waste your time with it because I think people don't really like it, but I know how to evaluate kind of some of the things you said that I can't do, I think I can do. So that's kind of where you on your, what is it on your wrap up? I guess it was your wrap up before this. You said something like that there's not anything out there that doesn't take, or that doesn't, I don't put any bias into my formula. I mean, I just don't. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm not prejudicing it to make sure that, say, for example, I don't really have a team. I mean, I guess if I did, maybe it'd be, I don't even know who it would be, maybe Colorado. I don't know, but I'm not gonna go in there and throw something in there that puts Colorado on top. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't do it. So I guess what I'm critiquing is your commentary about that people can't find something that isn't prejudiced, and I don't think that's true. I don't think I do that. So,
okay.
Well, I just throw that out.
Finish. I'm going to explain to you why I believe that is the case.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, bias isn't always just about a particular person. In this case, we're just talking about bias in terms of rankings. Sports teams isn't just always involving having a favorite team and therefore ranking them higher because you like them. It can involve just the bias of how you perceive teams in general. We all have a different perspective, and that perspective is not perfect.
No.
Therefore, we have a bias.
Sure.
So I could have a bias, even though I'm an Ohio State fan, I could have a bias against Ohio State just because they never please me or satisfy me. So I could rank them lower and have a bias in the other direction. And even, again, take them completely out of the equation. Just 2 teams that I have no interest in one way or the other in terms of favoring them or disfavoring them. I still come away from watching a game with a certain perspective that's not perfect. It's not a perfect perspective. So the only way I would relate that to what you do or what I believe you do is that, let's say after one game of the season, you have a rating system, correct?
Well, if you want me to tell you what it is, I mean, it is, but
we've been through this process before, and I never really got to explain it. But the point that I'm making is, after one game, there has to be assumptions made about how good those teams are.
Okay.
Right?
By me?
By something. Whatever's doing the ratings and the rankings, there has to be an assumption.
Well, I guess my question might be, do you want me to try to explain how it works, or would you just rather not hear it?
Well, I'm just going to say one other thing, then you can explain away. So I'll just take one game for an example out of every game.
I have a rating after 1 week. I did.
I know. Okay. And so there has to be an assumption made about how good the teams are to rank the teams.
Well,
and that
I'm not
that
really
assumptions made out of thin air. it's based on maybe last season, or it's based on something, but it's not perfect. It can't be, because we don't know how good the teams are if they've never played.
Uh-huh.
So for example, in week 1, Ohio State beats Notre Dame, Michigan beats Colorado State.
Right.
Okay, which wins better?
Well, I don't know that I really do that, but if you want, what was the
would believe that the best win is Notre Dame, but we don't know that. We're making an assumption. We're making a logical or reasonable assumption, but we have to start somewhere.
You're talking about Ohio State's win over Notre Dame? Is that what? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's definitely more of a, I agree with that. That's a more of a marquee game, I guess.
But we don't know that at the time.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I went to Colorado State. I mean, so I don't know. Are you trying to diss Colorado State? I mean, that's kind of where I went. I mean, I'm not gonna
be talking about any 2 games in the country. I just selected those 2 out of thin air.
Oh, okay. I don't really make any. I think your criticism really isn't fair, though. I'm not making any assumptions about either team by how they win. I just that's not what I do.
There have to be assumptions at the start.
I don't know that there are, but if you want,
there has to be, Chris. Otherwise, every team that won a game the first week would be ranked number 1 in the country, tied.
Well,
and maybe then you could rank them based on the score. Possibly the team that won by 58, you'd put them number 1. The team that won by 52, you'd put them at number 2.
Well,
if there were no assumptions made by the teams, then after 1 week, you'd have to rank all the teams.
I did.
Tied at number 1 in the country. Did you do this? All the teams that won are number 1 in the country, and then all the teams that lost are tied for number 62 in the country.
Well, or last. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, whatever the number is. Halfway through. Do you follow
that's really not what I do, so I don't know if that's a fair criticism or not. But
well, it is a fair criticism if based on your first answer to my first question about making assumptions.
Yeah, but I don't know that I'm doing that, though. That's kind of what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay, explain it.
Okay, cool. I'd kind of like to do it anyway. People, they might not, and I don't expect people necessarily to take what I say as the gospel or whatever. Because I mean, I'm just going to tell you this. I've studied this, and I really made a concerted effort and this has been over the course of I don't know how long, Mark. It might be a reflection of how stupid I am, because it took me. I'm 54. I just turned 54. I think I started trying to develop this when I was like 34, if I'm not mistaken. And what I kind of found out, I want to cut to the chase because I don't want to upset people that don't care. But I kind of found out I really couldn't do it it might be possible. And you're partly right about that. If I were to do this independently, which I'm really not doing it independently, but if I was doing it independently, I would have to make a lot of assumptions. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm taking data straight from Sports Reference, and you can make whatever opinion you want about that. They have I don't know what it's just called. It's a simple ranking system. And I don't know enough about it, really, and I don't know that I should have to know anything about it because I'm not the developer of it, but I use their data, and I know how to convert that data into a meaningful result that I think gives me what I want.
Chris, if you don't know their formula and what their data is based on, how do you trust data that you don't even know what it is or where it came from?
I can't entirely, but I saw that somebody did an independent survey of all these different, how there's I guess, I don't know how many. I think it was maybe because of the BCS. I'm not really sure, but somebody went and evaluated each one of these things that do these things. And this was one of the ones that almost finished first. I think there was one actually that finished higher. Maybe, but it wasn't by a whole lot. So I'm using the one almost that finished first as far as reliability, I guess. I don't know. I'm not the one that did the evaluation, but I'm using the one that I think might be the best, or if it's not, it's next to it. And so the reliability of it is very high. And I'm taking that data and I'm just converting it is all I'm really doing. And so I trust what I'm doing to have enough trust in myself to know that I'm doing it the right way.
Who said that this database is the best?
I don't remember. I think I could probably, if you want, I'll give you a link to it later. But it was somebody did an independent. I guess what they did was they compared what the values were, kind of like what you might do, against what actually, in other words, they were able to kind of evaluate, whether it was a good. And it finished very high. That's all I know. I don't know. And again, I don't know that I think the reliability, it wasn't like what you think it might be for like a really good one. It was like in the 70% or something like that for reliability. So it wasn't like 100%, no. But I think 70% is pretty high if you're talking about something that's, well.
So let me ask you a question. When you say reliability, do you mean that reliability is tested by it being a predictor of games?
I think so. Like I said, I'm not the one that did it, but
Okay.
I noticed that it was way up there, and I don't know how many. I think there's one that was like, it has an 8 or something, like S&P or something like that, finished high, whoever that is. I don't even know who it is. So I'm not even using the best one, but I'm using what I think is the best for me. But anyway, was it S&P? I don't really know. Maybe you know. But anyway, that was one that finished, I think, a little bit higher, but not significantly higher. So I guess I'm not using the best one, but I'm using the one that I think is the best for what I need it for. And let me just tell you this, okay? And you can make up your own mind what you think of it. You just told us that you knew before anybody else did that LSU was going to win the championship or something to that effect, right? Well, I can do that right now. I can tell you it's probably going to be Alabama and Ohio State because that's who the top 2 teams are, and I don't expect either one of them really to fall off the map or nothing. So if you want to put me to the test, go ahead and do it. I think it's going to be Alabama and Ohio State in the championship game. I don't know that maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, it might not happen, but that's what I think it'll be. And that's not like, oh, that's really surprising news. I know that's not going to surprise anybody, but with Ohio State winning, there you go. Now you can put me to the test. Because that's what it says. It says it'll be Alabama against Ohio State with Ohio State beating Alabama.
Okay.
That's if everything happens. Right. Okay.
There's a difference between ranking the teams and making a prediction. Those aren't necessarily the things. Same thing. They can be related.
I guess if Ohio State loses or Alabama loses, and there's probably a good chance either one of them could happen, I guess I'm out on left field or whatever. But I guess my point is, I'm a traditionalist, and I don't like all this playoff stuff because I just don't. I don't know that I have to give a good explanation for why. I'd rather it just be like it used to be, where we could have one game between the two best teams and call it a day, I guess. Like I say, I'd rather just have Alabama and Ohio State play in the championship game and call it a day than have to worry about whether Wake Forest or, I don't know that I really care if Wake Forest can do it. I'm not really that into it where I really care. But.
So, Chris, based on what you just told us, you're telling me that if you took your system, or I know that it's not necessarily your system, but somebody else's system that
somebody else. That's the interesting thing about it. It's not really mine at all.
Okay. Whatever it is. If you took that system and you went back to every year, the first week of the season.
Oh, no.
It would accurately tell us who was going to play in the national championship.
I think I had Southern Methodist at the first week, number 1. Southern Methodist with Tulane like right on their nip and tuck or whatever. So no, it doesn't do it to that extent. I think it was Southern Methodist, and it wasn't Tulane, but Tulane was way up there too. But I had Southern Methodist. Well, I'm just telling you.
Then why is the argument valid that it's now saying?
Well, that just proves it's not about bias, because the bias I wouldn't
question. Why is it a valid confirmation of how good this system is that it's saying Ohio State, Alabama now for a national championship game? If at other times it's had some ridiculous 1 and 2 teams that didn't come anywhere close to a national championship. Well, my rankings, I'm not saying my rankings are valid because right now I've got Clemson 1 and Kansas 2 that I believe that they're going to play in the national championship. That's not what makes the rankings valid. What makes the rankings valid is it's a logical review of the games that have been played.
Okay.
And that's the way I believe the team should be ranked right now. It has nothing to do with how good I believe the teams are. I predicted Ohio State and Alabama to play in the national championship game as well.
Well, that's my point. That's kind of my point. But it's like, I'm not really making a prediction, Mark. That's just who it is. I mean, there's kind of a difference between the two. I'm not predicting it'll be Alabama and Ohio State. It's like watching a race on television. If they stop the race right now with quarter, I don't know if it's a quarter or a third of the way through. It's like watching it on television. The top one is Ohio State, and number 2 is Alabama. And there's really no discussion about whether that's the truth or not. That's how it is. But I guess you don't trust me enough to think that I know what I'm talking about. But if the season ended today, it would be Ohio State number 1. It just would be. I mean, that's assuming I know what I'm doing, but I've been working on this for 20 years.
I don't have an issue with that, but I have an issue with when you say that this is a great system, because right now it says Ohio State's 1 and Alabama's 2, and there's a great possibility that they could play in the national championship game. And then I follow that up by saying, okay, if we went through your system every year, then it should be doing the same thing every year. If you're making a valid claim based on what's going on this year and the probability that that's going to be the championship game, then that should do it every year.
Exactly.
But it obviously doesn't.
Well, okay, all right. That's a fair point. And I don't want to I don't want to bother people with that point because, but you do make a good point because I think there have been past seasons where, for example, I think it was 2000, when Alabama got beat by Auburn and didn't advance, and then Auburn went and played Florida State. Remember that season?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I would have had either team probably. Well, I can't say that for sure. I think Florida State would have still been way up there, but I don't think I would have had Auburn as high as they were. But you can throw that at me if you want. But I'm not going to just say that just because one season didn't quite work out the way I expected it to, that says the whole thing isn't right. Because, I mean, and then I guess Alabama lost again, didn't they? Didn't they get beat again after that? I can't really remember. I think they got beat again. But I mean, that's kind of what happens in the middle of a race, though. So they went from being the top one, and then by the time the season was over, then they weren't the. And actually, I think just to be fair, and again, I want to be fair, I think after every game was played, I think it did have Florida State at number one after every game was played, but not before though. No, it's not predicting anything, and I don't think it would have put Auburn in there. I just don't think it would have. I think it actually might have put Alabama in there ahead of Auburn, even though because I'm not sitting there and saying, well, Alabama lost to Auburn just to go. That's not how I really do it. But so by that approach or whatever, I guess I would be out in left field. But apart from that, though, I guess it worked out pretty well because the best team actually did win the championship. So even that year, it kind of did work out. So I don't know if that's a fair criticism or not, is what I'm trying to explain to you. And you could give me a year if you have another year in mind, 2001. It wouldn't have had anybody but Miami, Florida on number one. I don't know that that's going to surprise anybody, but in 1984. Okay, here's the thing about 1984. And we've had discussions about this, and people probably get sick of hearing about it, but
yeah, we'll get through 1984, and then we'll need to move on.
Well, I just want to end it. I'll end it on that. It's fine. I'm not predicting anything with 1984. In fact, I've sent you 1,000 emails of probably telling you and I think if you've read them, and I don't know that you need to, but I'm not even saying that I know that Brigham Young won the championship. I'm saying that there's a pretty good chance that they might have. But the fact is, because I like to deal in facts, Mark, not like assumptions. The fact is they advanced to play UCLA in the belt championship and got beat. That's the fact. And I guess if people don't like the belt, then that's fine. But that's what I work in reality is what I try to do. So they did advance and they did play for the national championship. The fact is they got beat by UCLA in 1985 for the belt. And you can say what you want to about the belt. That's what Colorado won in 1990 was the belt.
Okay, well, don't get me started on the belt and the insignificance of the belt. But
I think it is significant.
The fallacy in what you just stated is obvious. A 5-year-old could point it out. You're talking about the 1984 national championship, and you're talking about a game that was played in 1985.
Yeah.
Validating whatever you're trying to determine.
They had to win to get to the belt championship.
Unrelated. They're completely different teams. Completely different evaluation of teams the next season.
No.
Yes, they are.
Both teams had to win to advance. That's what the belt does.
The belt. Nobody cares about the belt. The belt is a fun thing. It doesn't mean anything.
It means a lot.
No, it doesn't. It means nothing.
Who won the
worst team in the country?
In 1985? Alabama.
It doesn't mean anything.
Alabama.
When you are talking about the 1984 national championship and you bring up a game in 1985 that has not a damn thing to do with the 1984 season. Nothing. Zero. It doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't, Chris. You would have to be a complete imbecile to believe that a game that was played in 1985 has anything to do with determining a championship the year before.
It's like a tournament championship.
It has nothing to do with it.
If
it has to do with your belt championship, absolutely. I understand the rules of that.
Well, in boxing, if you don't
talking about boxing.
Well, but you don't get a fight for a title unless you win.
We're talking about football, and the season ends with the bowl season or the national championship game, depending on what era you're talking about, and then a team could prove to be the best team in a particular season and then never win another game for the next 10 years. And it doesn't matter. They won the championship that year.
Well,
all right, Chris.
Well, can I just tell you though? I mean, and I've already told people, it's just kind of something to think about. I'm not trying to Brigham Young to play Michigan, okay? In the 1984 in the Holiday Bowl, they had to win four against, it was over 2 years, but they had to beat four quality opponents. They had to beat, in 1983, they had to beat UCLA and Missouri, who were the two teams that beat Illinois, that went 10-2. So that's two they had to beat. The following season, they had to beat, in 84, they had to beat Pittsburgh. They had to beat Baylor.
Nobody's following any of this. I'm sorry to tell you that, but at this point, nobody's following anything that you're talking about. So there's no real benefit to us continuing the conversation. But call back anytime and we'll pick it up from there.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yes. It's like when a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to listen to it. Yeah. If everybody's tuned you out, then there's no reason to continue the conversation. And, people are like, their heads are swimming. Mine's not necessarily swimming from information because I know exactly what he's talking about. It's swimming from the complete illogic of the whole thing. All right. I believe we've got Aiden on the line. What's going on, man?
What's up, man? How you been?
I'm good.
So I noticed you had Ole Miss over USC in your top 25, or USC over Ole Miss in your top 25. That actually makes sense.
Yes.
I believe it should be the other way around.
Okay.
Because Ole Miss beat a top 10 team in Kentucky and a Georgia Tech team that previously beat a ranked team in Pitt. So I would kind of like to see where your head's at with why you have USC over Ole Miss as of right now.
Basically, that's saying that, yes, I would acknowledge that Ole Miss's win against Kentucky, albeit an extremely close win, in which they received an official's call. So I take those things into consideration as well. That Kentucky threw the game-winning touchdown pass with 40 seconds left in the game, and it was negated, and that was a questionable call, very questionable call. But Ole Miss did beat the best team on either one of those two teams' schedules. But USC has defeated more teams in more dominant fashion, more quality schedule start to finish. Georgia Tech, I'm not really sure. I'll give them a little bit more of a bump because, yeah, they just beat a Pitt team that they weren't supposed to beat. But, yeah, I'm just I'd have to look at my rankings to even see how close I have those two.
So essentially, it was like when I called with the Georgia-Arkansas situation back in week 2, where you favor the quantity of wins.
I don't favor anything in particular. It's
Or
putting all those things together.
But yeah, I saw the Michigan game.
Yeah.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see us utilize our wide receivers a little bit more.
Okay.
Because I think that is a very deep room.
Yeah, I believe that Michigan was certainly playing to the score and the defense they were playing.
But I think just overall, I'd like to see us utilize our wide receivers a little bit more because they can play and they're talented and they're good. But I just don't think we're not utilizing them in the right way, and neither are we utilizing Blake Corum in the right way from a passing game standpoint.
Okay, you want to see Blake Corum run 30 times and catch 8 or 10 passes too?
I mean, I'm not saying that, but I would like to get him some work in the receiving game.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
And I'm still kind of baffling over those illogical claims that last caller had.
Well, yeah, don't try to make anything out of that. He's an extremely intelligent individual, and he's got a system. And I'm not saying there's not some validity to it, because there is. It's just once we start talking about games in other seasons, counting for seasons, championships in other years, okay, that's where
Yeah.
I can't continue the conversation.
Yeah, like that's just a completely different year. Like players will leave. That's just the logic. I
It
mean, you
shouldn't even
can't
have
have.
to be explained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, a 5-year-old could probably articulate that properly, but
Yeah, Georgia just beat Alabama in the national championship game. I'm not going to then say Georgia should have won all these other games in other years and won championships.
I mean,
All right,
uh,
what else you got for us?
uh, and I am very excited to see that the AP poll finally ranked Kansas because they had the fourth most offensive touchdowns through 4 weeks. Jalen Daniels had the best QBR through 4 weeks, and Kansas did all of that with the sixth best strength of record. So I didn't understand why we had to wait till next week to rank Kansas.
Yeah, we
That
had to
that
wait. We had to wait because nobody thought they were any good, and so in the AP and in the coaches poll, there has to be overwhelming evidence.
like, and I think the AP should and the playoff committee should just do rankings like based off of resumes, because if you have talent, then that should correspond with you having a good resume.
Yeah, it's going to, and that's why people get a little upset with me if they have a particular team that plays, let's say, a week early season schedule. They're not going to earn much credit. But if they play a
And
good schedule and start playing some teams, they'll eventually earn their way up the rankings.
and it's not that we don't think those teams are good. It's just that they haven't done it with anybody with the pulse.
There you go.
Like I was kind of on the fence until that Maryland game out in Michigan, just because I haven't seen them do it with a pulse. I thought the running game and the offense overall would probably be one of the best in the country, and that defensive line I would have some concerns about. And they did look very good, especially defensively. The offense through 5 weeks still has some games to work on, but I was still pretty hesitant because I haven't seen them do it against anybody with the pulse. So, and I think also if we do rankings based off resume, we
Yes.
then don't have those times where people are like scratching their heads either.
I am with you, man. All right. Well, I appreciate the call.
All right. See you
Have a
next
good
time,
night.
brother.
You too. All right, let's keep it working here at the Voice of College Football. A few things to remind everyone of as we scroll through the top 25 that actually makes sense. Somebody had requested that Zoom play. So hopefully you caught it right there. Also think no, I didn't do it this week. I forgot. I did it the previous week. I put up a graphic at the end of the video to put all the logos up there at the same time. So I didn't do that to display it all at the same time. So anyway, Cheryl, appreciate Cheryl being here. Thank you for that. Cheryl, good to see you as always. Let's get to our next call here at the Voice of College Football. We got, who do we have on the line here?
Hey, I'm a huge fan of your videos. First things first, I gotta say go blue. But anyway, I got a couple of things I found interesting about your rankings. I completely understand how you do your rankings. I do them similar. I mean, I don't go quite as crazy as some of your lists go, but like
Yep.
I'm similar with the way you do yours. But you have, I believe you have Kansas State in your top 25,
Yep.
but like no Tulane. I'm
That's
curious
a
because
great question. That is a phenomenal
feel like
question.
I feel like at this point Tulane doesn't have like Houston is a decent win. I'm not saying Houston's a great win, but Tulane beat Houston, and
Yep.
they did beat Kansas State, and they have the same record. I don't feel like Kansas State's resume is that much better to where you can put them ahead of Tulane, because I have Tulane in my pool 22
Yep.
and Kansas State 23.
Okay. So I totally respect that question, totally respect the way you have them ranked in that order. So at whatever point I started doing this, I should go back and look 4 or 5 years ago. I did exactly what you did to a T. That was a rule. I never broke it. If one team beat another team, the head-to-head always won, as long as the record was the same, at least the same. Of course, I didn't rank a 4-6 team over an 8-2 team if they just won head-to-head. As long as the records were at least the same, that was my criteria. Hey, they proved it on the field. They have to be ranked ahead. Okay. Then I started to see some situations where it was getting in the way of evaluating a lot of resumes because there would be a log jam that would be created by one game.
No,
So
I've seen that.
what you're doing. I totally respect what you're doing, because even to the point, the one situation that comes to mind was last year. Oregon beat Ohio State. I kept Oregon. They continued to not look impressive after the Ohio State game. And then, of course, they hadn't lost a game. Then they lose to Stanford, and I still had to rank them ahead of Ohio State, even after they lost to Stanford. And I just noticed, okay, this is affecting a lot of other teams and their rank. And then I came across the same thing, and I sat there for 10 minutes looking at Tulane and thinking, I want to rank them ahead of Kansas State. They won that game head to head. I looked at the rest of their games. So they lost to Southern Miss. Southern Miss isn't that good, but still, I wanted to honor that head to head with both teams being 4-1. Then I just thought, this is causing too many other rankings not to be what I consider accurate. So I broke my rule and I said, you know what? Resume ranking, and even although the head to head has to be a serious, huge consideration, I had to break my rule here, or I chose to break it.
Okay.
It was just affecting too many other teams. If it was just those two teams, if we were just ranking those two teams, then I'd say absolutely. But it affects a bunch of other teams.
I understand that. And like I had the same thing with like LSU, Florida State. I think LSU is probably better than Florida State, but I have Florida State ahead of them.
Yeah, I stayed with that because of Florida State's, that they were dominant against BC. They whipped they didn't whip Louisville, but they beat, the rest of their resume, they've got some decent Power 5 wins. So yeah, I continue to honor that, even though that game was
Coors Light wants to keep
oops, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to ask you about Clemson. You have Clemson at number 1, but I mean, I was looking at like SP Plus rankings, and they have like Louisiana Tech. They're like 120, and that game was a 1-possession game at halftime. I was like, are there 2 wins against Wake Forest and NC State that much so good that they should be number 1 at this point?
Yeah, so that's a valid question as well. I'll answer it this way. The deeper we get into this, the less I'm going to nitpick over beating the number 121 team in the country versus beating the 89 team in the country. Because I'm not a computer, and I am making judgment calls to say what games here matter. And if you're the number 1 team in the country, or being considered as the number 1 team in the country in my ranking, or they could be 5, they could be 7, whatever. They're that high, they're that good. Does it really matter if they beat the number 121 team or if they were the number 104 team or the 89 team. It's if you're Clemson, if you're Ohio State, if you're of that status, does it really matter once you get into the 60s and 70s who you're playing?
Sure. To me, I just looked at it as a case of like, I mean, could you imagine Michigan being in a one possession game with Colorado State at halftime?
I can't imagine it because we just saw them kill them, but
Exactly. So that's why I was like, well, I feel like Maryland is a decent enough win to where Maryland and Iowa, the combination of two, where I felt like I could put them ahead of Clemson. Maybe
yeah,
that's ridiculous.
Do I think it's ridiculous?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's ridiculous. This is my argument. My argument is that I believe that North Carolina State and Wake Forest are decidedly better than Iowa and Maryland. The combination of those two teams are decidedly better than Iowa and Maryland. And Clemson, though they struggled with Wake Forest, shoot, they could have lost that game. So there's a plus on your side that Michigan was not in real danger of losing either one of those two games to Maryland or Iowa. The Maryland game obviously was competitive in the fourth quarter, but they weren't in any serious danger, where Clemson was in deep serious danger of losing to Wake. But their performance against NC State was pretty stellar. They in the second half, they beat them down. 30-20 doesn't really show. They turned a 10-6 deficit into a 30-13 lead, and the last touchdown didn't matter. And then you put on top of that they beat Georgia Tech 41-10.
Yeah.
And then that's was my reasoning for Clemson.
All right. That's all fair.
But no,
thank you. Peace.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
That call is what this is all about right there. Perfect. I didn't say my rankings were perfect. I didn't say that they couldn't be questioned. They can be. Absolutely, they can be questioned. I would say everyone between 12 and, you know what? Everyone between 12 and even off 25, keep going, that aren't even listed here. You can rank them all over the place. And then below that, I was just separating the one-loss teams there. And as you know, you can tell that I just don't order all the zero-loss teams and the one-loss teams. That's generally how it goes, but I certainly evaluate some one-loss teams to be better than undefeated teams. All right, welcome into the Voice of College Football, Dr. C. How you doing? Hello? Dr. C? Going once? Going twice? Going. All right, now we got Ben on the line. Ben, what's going on?
Hey, Mark, how's it going?
I'm doing well.
Hey, you guys touched on a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk with you about.
Uh-oh. You'll have to come up with something else.
Yeah, last call. You guys touched on it in the call before that. And then, of course, I wanted to get on the how you cannot be biased issue too. But hey, I'll leave that one alone for this call.
If that's what you want to talk about.
No. I did want to jump in on it earlier, but I'm kind of past that. A couple things. First, you really set yourself up good. The last little comments you made about now I can't really hold you to your rankings as hard because
why
you did put the disclaimer that you could really move, you feel that you could move some teams around. And if you were prideful and stubborn and say no, what I say is exactly right.
Oh,
no. This would be more fun for me.
I hope that nobody's. Well, I know that some people believe that's what they get. let's all understand communication is difficult in this world. We all miscommunicate. We text people and we think we texted them something and they see it completely different. We have communication problems all over the place. So regardless of how many times I say these rankings aren't flawless, they're not perfect, there's bias involved, I do my very best to eliminate the bias, but that's impossible. I have blood flowing through my veins.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to eliminate that. Still, people think that I read off that list and I refuse to have it challenged in any way. And I'm like, are you listening to me whatsoever?
No, I get it. And you made it. I like to assume that's the case just because it's more fun when I poke at it. But...
Well, sometimes I get the feeling from reading the comments and the way people respond that they would like a more arrogant Mark Rogers up here that would just slam my fist down and say, I know it all and I know more than anybody. I know more than you. You guys shut up and listen to me. This is the way it is.
Honestly, if you were doing the ranking systems from ground zero with a computer, you know how hard it would if you're comparing I don't think if you're comparing teams to teams and you start getting into what teams did against certain teams that did, like common component opponents, and then it starts adding up so much. I mean, you got to think there were 131 teams in the FBS and 130 in the FCS, and they all play each other somewhat. Yeah. I mean, the power 11 games, 11 to the power of 260 or something like that. I mean, it starts.
Yeah,
that's the math on it gets insane. I mean, to really start, no person could even, figure it out.
Like I want to build some kind of spreadsheet that, especially once we get to this point in the season and later, that would take, let's say, Florida's 8-2 and Auburn's 8-2. They didn't play each other, but of course they both play in the SEC. So they probably played 4 teams that are the exact same teams and compare them and kind of like eliminate those games. But that wouldn't even work because I want to evaluate Auburn beat LSU by 3 touchdowns. They killed them. Florida lost to LSU, or they barely beat them. So I even take all that into consideration as best I can. But yes, admittedly, it becomes more and more difficult and convoluted and complicated the more games are played.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, one of the things I want to call is you have Michigan below Ohio State again.
Yeah.
Okay, but when I look at your number 11, I was pretty thorough this time. I personally hand wrote your list when I watched it, and you got Ole Miss at 11, and you have Clemson at 1, and I look at those two teams.
Yep.
And their schedule, their team, their wins and losses are very comparable.
Sure.
I mean, I think the Kentucky win is a better win than anything that Clemson has.
You think that Ole Miss beating Kentucky 22-19 and Kentucky threw the game-winning touchdown pass and it got called back on a fairly weak illegal motion call, that's a better win than Clemson beating NC State in a game that they came back from 10-6 and they outscored them 24-3 in the second half.
Okay, so I didn't catch the end of that game. I was going from the score lines, so that's probably. But I was just looking at NC State as.
You think Kentucky's better than NC State?
I think Kentucky's well better than NC State, and I think NC State maybe even more overrated. I mean, NC State's beat Texas Tech.
Yeah.
And who else? They haven't played anybody other than Texas Tech. I mean,
Kentucky beat Florida.
Yeah, Florida.
And they've beaten a couple bad teams by, they struggled against Northern Illinois. They beat them by 8 points. They struggled against Miami of Ohio. They were leading that game by 3 points in the fourth quarter.
So you're giving more credit. You think NC State's better than Kentucky?
I'm giving Clemson. I think they're very comparable. So I'm not calling you crazy in any such way. I think NC State and Kentucky. I've said this a number of times over the last couple of weeks. I think after the top 3 teams in the country, let's put Michigan in there too. After the top 4 teams in the country, after Michigan, I'll add them to the other 3. As it stands right now, think about all these teams: Kentucky, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, NC State, Wake, Penn State, Minnesota, Oklahoma State, Baylor, who knows, maybe even TCU and Kansas. I'd like to see a little bit more out of each one of them. I could keep going with another 10 teams. I have no idea. Texas, I have no idea who would win those games when they played.
Well, I mean, you could put Michigan in that. I think Michigan's a little more shaky than the other 3, than Alabama. But even, I mean,
probably
we've seen Georgia. We've seen Georgia falter quite a. I mean, this year we've even seen Alabama have. Alabama should have lost to Texas. I mean, Alabama had that win against Texas, but I mean, to me, it was more. I think the officiating really hosed Texas that game. I think if a call would have went, a couple calls could have went Texas's way, and it would have changed the results of that game. So yeah, I mean, I guess to me, when I look at it, I mean, I think that's probably the team that's been less prone to falter is Ohio State. It's so far who we've seen them play.
Yeah. I mean, Michigan has completely pummeled 3 awful opponents. Ohio State has pummeled some teams that, sure, we know Wisconsin's not what they usually are. No doubt. But, they destroyed them. Rutgers isn't a good team, but they're a Power 5 team in the Big Ten, and they'll win some games. And again, Ohio State just pummeled them. So Michigan is yet to destroy somebody that's a legit team.
Yeah. Well, when I'm looking at Michigan, I mean, I definitely looking at a bias. When I watch a game, I'm more nervous than somebody else that would watch it. I'm only talking about how I value Michigan. I think Michigan has a higher upside than any of the other. I think we haven't seen everything that Michigan has yet. I think there's still a lot of room for growth is Michigan out of those 4 teams. But I just don't think out of those 4 teams, I don't think they're showing the consistency as the other 3 yet.
So I want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting what you just said. Do you think if all those teams hit their ceiling that Michigan is the best team in the country?
No, I'm not saying that. I am saying that I think Michigan's underperforming more than the other teams are.
Okay.
I'm not quite that. I think they're just underperforming more than the other teams are. I think their offense could have a lot higher ceiling.
I got you.
So and as far as the other, I mean, Alabama, I mean the talent, the Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, as far as talent goes, I kind of boggles my mind with when I look at Ohio State, their defense, and I just the talent they have in their defense, I think they underperform defensively. Would you assess that? Definitely last year, and this year I haven't seen them play any. I don't know if we've seen an opponent that's really tested them enough on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, no, we haven't, and but the Ohio State improvement on defense is still pretty easy to see and statistically easy to see because had they played the same opponents last year that they played this year, they would be giving up a lot more points and yardage because they were last year.
Well, it's just when I look at Notre Dame. I mean, I mean, let's see. Let me pull up. Okay, but yeah. Well, I look at Notre Dame though. The Notre Dame put on. Notre Dame played them, and they lost. 21-10. I mean, and Notre Dame hasn't put on a lot of points this year to anyone they played. Notre Dame's played. Beat Cal 24-17.
Sure.
They did put 45 on the North Carolina, but then they went and lost to Marshall, only scoring 21. So I mean, Notre Dame hasn't put on a lot of points. I mean, Rutgers have been scoring. They scored 10 against Notre Dame, yet 22 against Boston College, 16 against Temple. And they still, that's comparable to what they played against, what they, played against Ohio State. I mean, there's a difference because Ohio State's putting a lot, giving it their every time Ohio State scores, it's basically churning the ball over for giving the other team an opportunity to score.
Yeah.
They have more opportunities to score.
And there's also a factor there that there's no way we can ever measure. We can only talk about, and that's when you're winning a game by 40 points. What's your defense?
Yeah.
What's the mindset? What's the tenacity level? All of that. When Ohio State knows if we give up 10 points, we're going to win by 40. I would love to know what would Ohio State's defense do against Rutgers if you said you can't give up a point. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing I wanted to, actually wasn't really calling to talk about that. I did want to mention like Ole Miss's team schedule versus Clemson. And I think and they're pretty close. I mean, Clemson you could argue that, Clemson has the edge because they have another top team in there, but they also have, like you were talking before, they almost lost to Wake Forest. But also Ole Miss, I didn't realize had that close of a game to Kentucky. So that kind of take that argument out. But the other thing is, I think Michigan actually has a stronger schedule so far with Maryland and Iowa than Ohio State does. I don't think Ohio State has a win on their schedule that's at the caliber of a team like Maryland or Iowa. I mean, using your ranking system at least.
You don't think Notre Dame is comparable to Maryland and Iowa?
Well, because if I'm looking at Notre Dame and I'm looking at the teams that they've played and won and lost against, Notre Dame struggled against Cal. Yes, they beat North Carolina in the 45-32, but they lost to Marshall.
Sure,
and they lost. That's a big loss.
Yeah.
Iowa lost to, who did Iowa lose to? Iowa lost to Iowa State. It's not Marshall.
Yeah.
Iowa hasn't had a humiliating loss like that.
True.
They lost a 10-7 game to Iowa State, a close one.
Sure.
And then they lost to Michigan.
Yeah. I would say that Iowa's had humiliating performances, but you're right. They haven't lost anyone,
But then, but Maryland is far superior performance than Notre Dame this year. I mean, Maryland doubled Michigan State's score, put a good win on SMU, and they haven't lost a game other than the Michigan game. So I would clearly rate that higher than Notre Dame.
Well, for one thing, Maryland hasn't played Ohio State. So let's understand that.
Well, but
let's understand that
Maryland lost, but Maryland got their loss to Michigan, and the same as Notre Dame got their loss to Ohio State.
True.
I mean, if you take out Michigan and Ohio State, Maryland's undefeated, and Notre Dame still has a loss to Marshall.
Yeah, and Maryland hasn't beaten a team as good as North Carolina. Decidedly.
Decidedly, but
not even close.
What's that?
That Notre Dame North Carolina game was not even close. Forget the final score. They were up by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. It was not a close game.
Yeah, but they still didn't lose to Marshall, and they still beat a team.
And again, Maryland hasn't beaten a team nearly as good as North Carolina.
How good do you think North Carolina is?
I think they're better than Michigan State. I think that they're good enough to beat App State and beat Virginia Tech by 31 points. And, I think they're probably an 8-4, 7-5 team that's got a shot to win the ACC Coastal Division.
Yeah. I mean, they had a close game with the App State, and they had a close game with Georgia State.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, so I'm not looking at them being,
and all we've seen out of Michigan State is they've played 3 consecutive weeks and they've looked terrible.
Yeah. So you're kind of basing that resume so you think because Notre Dame beat North Carolina that gives them the edge on Maryland, even though they lost to Maryland, even though they lost to Marshall.
I was not making any kind of direct comparison until now between Maryland and if I started doing those things, when this would come out? This would come out after the next week's games were played.
Your computer, No, I understand.
If I was making a comparison like 3 degrees away from the schedule about every team in the country, then yes.
Yeah.
I would be releasing I would really confuse people because I'd be releasing my top 25 that actually makes sense week 3 when it was week 6.
Yeah, no, I understand. But and that's kind of more what I was getting at. I was just looking at it like I looked at Ohio State and, I think their Notre Dame victory, they beat Notre Dame and it wasn't like, when they weren't like, they didn't destroy Notre Dame. There was, Notre Dame was into that. It was in that game. Sure. Probably more so than Maryland was in the game against Michigan. And I think there's
it's debatable.
It could be close. Even close, so let's say if they're close, but I kind of gave Maryland the edge on it just because they didn't falter to Marshall, who lost to Troy and I think Temple significantly already this year, so I was giving Maryland thing, and then I give Iowa so let's say Notre Dame and Maryland are close.
Okay.
Iowa is better than anybody else on Ohio State's win schedule. Were you going to compare them to Rutgers? Because Iowa already beat Rutgers.
Sure.
Or Wisconsin. Wisconsin, who lost to Illinois and Washington State. Along with OSU.
Well, I think you just hit on the key right there is, yes, I do believe Iowa is better than those 2 teams. But I would also say those are 2 wins for Ohio State versus 1 for Michigan. Ohio State beat Rutgers and
in
Wisconsin, and Michigan beat Iowa.
And Michigan beat, but I think Iowa's, so I'm looking at Iowa and Maryland being, and I could see, but it's I'm looking at Iowa and Maryland being higher tier teams. And that I'm looking at that as better than being, because Rutgers, then there's a significant drop than Iowa and Maryland.
Okay.
I think if you took the top 2, who do you think's the better team, Wisconsin or Rutgers?
This year, that's it.
And I don't know. It looked to me, it looks like Michigan could have the better. I didn't think I'd be saying this, but at this point of the season, it looks like Michigan could have the tougher schedule so far, which is kind of crazy looking at the teams we're looking at, But yeah, that's kind of where I was at. I was kind of thinking Ohio may have been a little bit higher in your schedule on your rating than they could be, and even looking at compared to other teams, like I think Ole Miss. It's hard. If I was doing this, it would be hard to judge. One thing I would say I would give for Ohio State, they have really laid to the like to Toledo. They put 77 points on them. Arkansas State's a better team. If you look at your bottom teams, they're better than all the teams that Michigan's played. So,
yeah, that was a slight factor. The Michigan certainly gets weighed down they get weighed down on one hand by those awful first three teams, but at the same time, they did to them what they should have done. If they would have won those games 35-17, 31-14, then, I'd really knock them down. But, we didn't gain a whole lot about Michigan through the first three games, but at least they crushed those teams.
Yeah. All right, Mark. Well, that's all I had. That's all I had for you. I was thinking there's a little Ohio State bias in there still, but
okay.
you're reasonable about it.
As opposed to the Ohio State fans that are all over me because I ranked them too low.
Yeah, that's
I get it from
fun.
all sides.
You just can't win, Mark.
Central Michigan's played a pretty tough schedule against the likes of Penn State and I believe Michigan State and Oklahoma State. But anyway, I'm looking at a Toledo win this past weekend against Central Michigan. They beat them by 21 points.
Hey, where would you put Maryland if you were to put it? Would you put in? I mean, look at Maryland and they're close. Like even you look at like Washington and your top, they're in Washington's 23 and they're close to Maryland's.
Oh yeah. Maryland was right.
They had to be right up there, right?
Yeah. The two things that have to be explained is you can throw a blanket over like 10 teams, 10 spots. So the difference between 4 and 8 is virtually nothing. And obviously these rankings, I could carry them out and the number 26 team, that's just as valid a ranking, between 25 and 26 as it is between 24 and 25. There's nothing magical about 25 teams.
Yeah.
I try to preach that from time to time. It's just a arbitrary number.
What you're saying is when you're not in the team that would be, when you're not in the 25, if you're not in the 25 team, then you're not just dropped off and you're nobody in the out in space.
Exactly. Yes. I hate this. They've got ranked wins and then everybody else didn't count.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Mark. Well, I'll give somebody else a chance to pick at you, but I appreciate the top 25 and appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. All right, let's keep it moving. We got DeAndre on the line. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. My big issue is, and not with yours, but I didn't really look at yours. I know you got Clemson ranked number 1, but I got an issue with the AP poll. I don't understand, and I hear some of the callers say State and Wake Forest is not that good, but Clemson still beat 2 ranked teams, and like you just said, they played Connecticut, Colorado State, and Hawaii. I can't understand why they're ranking Michigan over Clemson, and then the same thing with LSU and Florida State, and I know Florida State pretty much fluked up and won that game, but you shouldn't have to rank those teams higher. And they played on the field. I think you said that to one of the callers. They're like, if they played on the field, you should rate that team higher if they have comparable records. And why is the Florida State ranked and they lost to a ranked team that's pretty good in Wake Forest? So I quite didn't understand that one with the AP poll.
DeAndre, you are welcome, of course. You're my man to call anytime, but you realize you are talking to the last person on earth you should be talking to about the AP poll.
Oh yeah, I know. I know. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I agree with what you rank. I don't know about Kansas being number 2. I mean, I'll be honest with you. By the eye test, I think Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia are still the best teams. I know Georgia hasn't played well.
This isn't about who the best teams are.
Right. Well, I know it's about who's at the top of the who deserves to be number 1. And I'm agreeing with you that Clemson does deserve to be number 1. But I'm just saying the AP poll to me got it all twisted up, in my opinion. I just think that they got it wrong. Yeah, it doesn't make it doesn't make a logical sense. I really don't care about anybody but the first 16 anyway. I think Ole Miss is a good team. Um, I think Georgia's good, and I think Alabama's good, like we just talked about. But I just feel like sometimes the AP poll, which I know you don't like either, I think they just put anybody in there. Um, what I was about to say, I wanted to ask you. I was off the subject a little bit, but why Paul Chris get fired?
He got fired. Well, we don't know why he got fired because, of course, they don't answer that question. But he got fired because they see a Big Ten that's going to be adding USC and UCLA. That's going to be much more difficult to win. And those teams are going to be playing in their division or their pod of sort. And they don't like the trajectory that they're seeing from a team that usually goes 9-3 or 10-2 that went they did go 9-4 after the bowl game last year, but they're off to a horrible start this year, and their recruiting class right now is 57th in the country, and they've got a superstar in Jim Leonard as their defensive coordinator, and with all these other job openings, he will probably go somewhere else if they don't move him up.
Right. Well, see, my issue is with Wisconsin. Sometimes you got to be who you are. And we saw that with Nebraska when they tried to change their, when it went from the option, and they tried to go to a spread or, whatever they tried to go to back after 2001, whoever they got rid of. I can't really remember who the head coach they went to. However, my point is that I think teams got to stay true to what works. How important is it for you to win a national championship? And some schools are really not that important. I think we talk about like from the standpoint of money. I know you said, well, money means more. So if you're putting out a decent product and you got still support stands, you're not going to be able to play with Southern Cal because Southern Cal is recruiting in a total different recruiting base. So keep on doing what you're doing and build your offensive line, red shirt guys, and stuff like that. You don't see Wake Forest changing because of what Clemson and Florida State does. They keep doing what they do, developing players. They might be good every 2 or 3 years. Even Northwestern, I know we thought they were going to be a little bit better this year, but they do that same thing. Like we're just going to build our team up for a couple years, and then we're gonna have one good year. I don't understand that move because when the Fred Bitterman built was there, I think that's what him and Barry Alvarez got in an argument about, is that he wanted to change the offense to a more of a spread concept, like everybody else, and I think that's why he got out of there because him and Barry Alvarez wasn't getting along because he was like, what's working is working. Some of these schools live in a pipe dream, like they're gonna go get these big coaches and they're gonna change. Sometimes it's about the area. I was looking at Nebraska's roster back in the '80s, like Urban Fryer and Turner Gill. Who was the running back? Roger Craig, I believe. Most of those guys came from New Jersey. You look at when Wisconsin's been good, a lot of their players came from New Jersey. Sometimes you just got to keep what works for you. You know what I'm saying? I just totally disagree with that, and I'm kind of disappointed in Wisconsin for getting rid of them. And if I was Georgia Tech, you might disagree with me, but I would reach out to Shaw at Stanford because no, Georgia Tech's not on Stanford's level far as academic, but they're right below. And they have strong academic standards at Georgia Tech, and that's why it's so hard for them to get players in there. And I would ask David Shaw what would it take for him to come to Georgia Tech because he does a lot of recruiting down in the Stanford area. So I know that's off topic from what you're talking about tonight, but I would just some of these coaching firings. We all saw Frost coming. we probably saw Collins coming at the end of the year. It was just something on my mind that I saw and I wanted to talk to you about. Cause I just don't really why get rid of him. And I know Jim Leonard. I think he played with Baltimore for a little bit. I know he's a pretty good
safety. Did we lose you? DeAndre's out. All right, let's keep it going. Fan of Fanatics. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going? I can actually answer that question for DeAndre on that. The reason why they fired the coach at Wisconsin at this moment in time is because of what Kansas is doing. They have the assistant coach. They're going to put the interim tag on him, see how he does. If he doesn't turn it around or doesn't start doing good, they don't take the tag off. They got a Wisconsin guy that's tearing it up at Kansas. And then if they want to try to get him, they'll go after him if the intern don't work out. Because the guy at Kansas is a Wisconsin guy.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, we've mentioned that a number of times here. Exactly. Yes, Jim Leonard's got an audition going on.
Yeah. Now, when I was talking about the polls, per se,
yep.
I'm kind of interested in how that all works because, you know, when you look at like an AP poll, I call them I call it a pencil neck poll, because where do you start? What is your origin and where your start? How can you not be biased in any form or way? I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about anyone creating a poll. I mean,
absolutely.
Do you start from a roster of what people say the amount of talent on paper and then go from there? Because I'm afraid if we didn't, it might be in alphabetical order, and then Alabama still might be close to the top. So I don't really know where to start with that. So I thought about. I find a lot of things when I was listening on here is a lot of posturing for the fan, and a lot of times you can't really step out of that and see what is actually going on with teams. And I think through the first 3 games of the season, you looked at Georgia as a team that no one could dare ever beat. They never would have a chance. And then they started having a couple of close games, and then you have these factions that all of a sudden they see a team that played their team that might have beat them or they might have beat, and then they want to try to manipulate them into being better than what they actually are, whether it's on paper or whether it's on resume, or resume based. And that's why when I was looking at, like, let's take Clemson as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we knew last season that Clemson had absolutely no pulse on offense at all. They literally, I mean, they were afraid to throw the ball. I mean, you knew what they were going to do. They couldn't throw the ball at all. They were just afraid to. They called plays completely against it. So when you look at that team this year, you have the same players on paper, so you know that when you're going to try to run the ball on them based as a matchup, you're going to be running into a brick wall. So you better be able to pass. So if it's a game of matchups, and like you said, you have the head-to-head way of looking at things, you also got to consider that teams get better the more they play together in a season. And I think that there's a lot of a trend of a team coming together and gelling, and then you start seeing whether a team is going to falter or if they actually gel as a team. And that's why I was kind of laughing about that the Michigan fan earlier. I mean, he's a great guy, cool guy, but how in the world is he going to talk about North Carolina barely beating Appalachian State when Michigan lost to Appalachian State, and it's one of the funniest things of all time. And I happened to be on that Appalachian State football team when that happened.
Oh, nice.
So I thought that was that was kind of funny. But
congratulations to you for being part of one of the most memorable wins in the history of college football.
Hey, we had a few of them, and it really shouldn't have been that much of a mystery because we had played LSU. LSU had just won the national championship, and I think they only beat us by, I think it was like 14 points or something. It might have been, it wasn't by like, like 50 something points like what people should expect to be, but I mean, we're talking almost 20 years ago now.
LSU won the national championship that year. The year that
we played. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we played them the following season, the first game of the year. And we had played Hawaii. I think we might have played Hawaii that season then, the first game of the year. That's been a long time. It's been a while back.
2008, LSU beat App State 41-13.
What year was that? 2004?
8.
Is that 2008? No. This was before then. I think it had been
2005. LSU beat App State 24-0.
Well, that's not as bad as 50-0, I guess. I guess in our minds we just we thought that we were good because they didn't beat us by 50-0. So I guess after all these years, I kind of they whooped their butts, but it wasn't as bad as what it could have been, I guess.
Oh, no doubt.
But anyways, the point that I was making was that you got me off. You're too smart, man. You're so good. But I appreciate your show, and I just think that people need to look at how teams are progressing.
Yep.
And realize that it takes a team to actually how they gel in the ingredients. Because I was thinking about if Wake Forest had not lost to Clemson and NC State had not lost to Clemson, where would they be ranked?
Exactly. And that's, you bring up a great point, because how many teams would be ranked if they wouldn't have played like the one monster on their schedule? So if, for example, NC State played Clemson in November and last weekend played Louisville instead, well, right now they'd be ranked, they would have probably in the AP and the coaches poll, they would have jumped up a couple more spots and they'd be like number 6 in the country right now.
Yeah, that's I think that's a very important point, because I mean, you have a starting point, and I think you look at it like the only people in the world that are absolutely cracking me up is Georgia fans. Georgia fans are the ones that like, they know that they were so good that they're actually saying, "Oh, we're not even a top 10 team right now." That's a lie. You absolutely are a top 4 team, a top 3 team, no doubt. As far as what you can put on the field, it just depends on if you're motivated to play the game. And I think that there are some hiccups that just happen in a season, because I think that parity is starting to grow with the transfer portal, that some teams hadn't been doing so good and a guy hadn't been getting enough playing time. He's going to go to greener pastures for him so he can put up some stats and try to get a future for himself in the NFL. I don't necessarily agree with it. And I also think a lot of NIL deals in recruiting, by having NIL recruiting, that basically you are setting a precedence that you just come here and we're going to pay you. And then all of a sudden you get bad performance because it's not paid based upon performance-based pay, like, and when I try to, I guess, look at it with the left brain and analytically, I think the only way to rate the teams at the beginning of the season is literally to look at who has the most talent and who has the best coaches.
Yep.
I mean, because, to be honest, there's no way, I don't think, that you can really make a ranking until after week 5, or at least the first couple of weeks of maybe some league play.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
in a road game.
Absolutely. There's yeah, I completely understand the argument that some people have that there shouldn't be rankings until week 4 or week 5. But then again, who's going to make the determination when that's going to be? Number one, is it week 4? Is it week 5? Is it week 2? Is it week 7? Um, and also, we're always going to have rankings because people enjoy them. So just like we see rankings all during the off season that we have nothing to go on, but people just like rankings. So really the only way I could think to conceivably come up with a preseason ranking that is at least, I'm not going to say it's going to be accurate, but it's going to be logical, is that if you take the previous season's rankings, the last rankings, and then you come up with some kind of mathematical formula that says, team that was number 10 in the country, they had this level of a recruiting class that's coming in. They lost this much production. They lost 37% of their offensive production and they lost 62% of their defense. And you come up with some kind of formula that takes last year's rankings, the final standings, and then translates that into additions and losses and comes out with a ranking.
Yeah, it almost becomes like like the old college football game that they're making the new one, in like a Madden game where you have the ranking of the players, and then it just like kind of gives your team a kind of, your strength is 93% on defense, it's 86 on offense, or that, but what you acquire or lose, it kind of, it's kind of diluted in some ways because nobody knows. And I mean, I congratulate you on I don't want to do it. I mean, going through all that is gotta be a lot of work.
Yeah, what's funny is, and I'll need to let you go after this, we got too many calls piled up here, is funny because you can criticize me for a lot of things, but what somebody criticized for me for a couple weeks ago was that they said something like, you just threw this at the wall. And I'm thinking, no, it's you criticize it all you want. It's the exact opposite. You know how easy it would be for me, just like anybody else, to list out the 25 best teams in the country and say, there's my top 25, and just go through the standard. Bama's 1, Georgia's 2, Ohio State's 3, Michigan's 4, and just, and like the AP, they just basically take what they had the week before, and then they, so-and-so lost, let's drop them about 8 spots. And that's what everybody's doing in their poll. What I do takes a lot more work than that.
Absolutely. Well, that's another thing. One last thing about the AP poll and those polls, you got to realize you got to follow the money. The conferences that they have the most contracts with, well, Disney owns about everything, which owns ESPN, and then you got Fox, who owns a lot of other things that owns the rights for the Big Ten. And then you got all these big broadcasting stations that own all these, actually own every writer in the Associated Press, pretty much. So you got to look at the scrapes underneath that. What do they want to build up? You'll see a team come up from not really that kind of great of a win, so they can get their marquee matchups with higher ranks for their primetime slots. So, I mean, I think that might have a little bit something to do with it, because like by your poll, Clemson absolutely deserves to be number 1 by your poll, because they just beat 2 teams that would be in probably the top 12 if it wasn't for losing to Clemson. And they got better doing it. And when they should have been overexhausted if they really weren't that good, but they're just getting better. Are they as good as Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia? Not right now. If they got completely healthy and they kept zooming offense, maybe. But I mean, I don't see it right now just yet. But they do deserve it, and I applaud you for doing that. And thank you for having me on, sir. And you have a great day.
I appreciate it, man. Have a good night and call back anytime. Now, I'll say this very quickly because we get a lot of calls, but one of the reasons why it hit me to do this, besides looking at the AP poll every week and saying, that doesn't make sense. Didn't they just beat them? Like this season, If anybody watched Washington and Michigan State play, are you kidding me? It wasn't even a game, and they had the same record. No, correct. Hang on. Washington was still undefeated after they beat Michigan State, and Michigan State obviously had the loss to Washington, and the game was not close. And the coaches poll still had Michigan State ranked ahead of Washington. So anyway, I kept seeing things like that, and I was like, okay, I've had enough of this. We're going to do our own rankings. But going way back, like, 25 years ago, I'll tell this story real quick. When I was a broadcaster in Mississippi and a sports director at a CBS station in Mississippi, and I was at the Ole Miss, Alabama, Mississippi State games all the time, going to all the news conferences, and that was what I covered, what we covered. So I was going to SEC games constantly. Anyway, I was a college football nerd junkie. So even before I got into broadcasting and graduated from college and everything, I was the guy, just like hopefully I am right now, that knew everybody's stats and was just avid. And I loved all of college football. But I started to rub elbows with, when I worked at this station for 7 years, I started to notice the guys that I didn't have an AP vote because I was not a writer. I was a broadcaster. I started rubbing elbows with all these AP writers that wrote for the Tuscaloosa paper and the Birmingham paper and the Tupelo paper and the Memphis paper and all these papers. And I started to observe them. And when I talked to them, number one, I realized almost none of them know anything about what's going on in college football out of their little circle, which is Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama. That's all they know. And then they would know a little bit LSU and a little bit Tennessee, and that's it. That's all they knew because they had blinders on. And it wasn't their fault. That was their job. So they're voting on the top 25. And they could not tell you who Michigan's quarterback was. They had no idea. They couldn't tell you who the best running back in the Pac-10 was. They had no idea. And I talked to these people, and I quickly discover, well, this is their job. They know who just fractured and slightly fractured an ankle that was the third string guard on the Ole Miss football. That's their job. They need to know everything about Ole Miss, but they know nothing about Boston College. They don't know who Matt Ryan is, whatever. And I determined, why are these people voting on the top 25? They don't know. Their life is consumed by the team that they're covering. They're not college football analysts. They're Ole Miss analysts, Arkansas analysts, fill in the blank. All right. Michael Hogue's here. What's going on, Michael?
Hey, Mark, how you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing just fine. What's
you
going
know, one
on?
thing I was just thinking about it, besides I'm going to keep some people, some disagreements and stuff going on in the chat, but I got this suggestion. Have you thought about when you reveal the new top 25 that actually makes sense, showing the previous weeks, to see, because if I'm not mistaken, was there some teams that flip-flopped from the week before?
Absolutely. You need to stop thinking about this in a traditional sense, because you could have, let's say, the eighth. I was about to say the eighth best team in the country, but that's not what this is about. You could be the number 8 team based on your resume, and somebody else could be the number 10 team in the country, and they both win, but the number 10 team played a much better team than the number 8 team. So their resume became greater than the number 8 team from the previous week.
No, I see your point, but what I'm saying is, what do you do? Say like number 8 team plays the number 10 team.
Michael, we're
and
losing
the number
you.
10 team wins. Can you hear me?
Yes. What was your example?
The number 8 team plays the number 10 team. The number 10 team beats the number 8 team.
Sure.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
And another thing, that was my point. I didn't know if you would do that, or would you maybe do that? Leave it to 10. Another thing also I'm trying to figure out is, everybody's piling up on the Big Ten West this year. Is that because how it's going right now? when is the Big Ten East going to start? Are they getting ready to start beating up on each other also in 2 weeks?
No, they're not going to beat up on each other because there's 2, maybe 3 teams that are going to beat up on everybody else. It's not the Big Ten West.
But no, I mean, yeah, great, but I mean, they got to start playing each other. Is what I'm saying.
Well, of course they're going to play each other. And once a division or a conference, hang on, Michael. Once a division or a conference in particular plays each other, what's the result? What is the most obvious result of every conference in America? What is going to be the result of all the games that they play?
You're going to have the record's going to be the same at the end of the day.
Exactly. They're all going to be 500. Every conference in America, regardless of how good or how bad it is going to be 500 within the conference. Now, the difference.
That's the point.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say now the difference here is in the Big Ten, is our case sample here. In the Big Ten, of course, you're playing everyone in your division, but you're also playing 3 cross division games. So if we're expecting to have happen, what we would expect is that the East would beat the West much more than the West is going to beat the East, we think. And then within the division, think of it this way, Michael. Most likely, we have yet to see it play out, so I might be wrong, but most likely the West is going to be a free-for-all. Illinois is going to beat Iowa, but Iowa's going to beat Purdue, but Purdue's going to beat Minnesota. They're going to, it's going to be more balanced. Where the Big Ten, Ohio State's going to beat everybody except maybe Michigan, maybe Penn State. Penn State's going to beat everybody except probably Ohio State, maybe Michigan. Michigan's going to beat everybody except Ohio State. Like there's not the balance in the East that there is the West. You throw out Northwestern because they look really awful. Everybody in the West, everybody in the West, you couldn't throw a matchup at me, and I would be surprised if one team or the other won the game. Whereas the East is divided between the elite and a couple good teams and then some bad teams.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there, but the point I'm trying to make is, and they're going to start eating itself out here with the next couple weeks, so because eventually they're going to have Penn State to play Michigan, and Ohio State, and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
It's going to reveal itself. Sure, they're playing out the schedule.
And yeah, and I just see like within the next few weeks too, it's going to actually balance itself out to where it'll probably be a 2-team race in the Big Ten West also. Maybe 3 teams.
Yeah, I guess
2 or 3 team and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to say. It's just like they haven't played each other really like they have. It's more balanced in the Big Ten West right now. But I'm saying within the next few weeks too, and they're going to start balancing out in the East.
No, it's not going to balance out.
No, Mark.
Michael, our first issue is it's difficult to hear you because your audio is popping all over the place. So that's one big issue that we have.
Okay. My point is like how it's balanced right now in the Big Ten West with everybody beating each other. That's what I'm trying to say. And because it's going to have to be, because you're not going to have 3 undefeated teams here in the next few weeks with Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State.
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say. And they go to start.
Yeah, gotcha. Yes, there can only be 2 undefeated teams in the Big. Well, now, there can only be 2 undefeated teams in the whole conference, in any conference.
Yeah, but it's not gonna be like that this year for the Big Ten because everybody in the West has a loss already. So
no, I'm talking about in the conference. There can only be 2 teams in every conference in America that go undefeated, in which there are divisions. In the Big 12, there can only be 1 undefeated team in the Big 12.
Yeah.
All right, Michael.
And speaking of that, last thing.
Thanks.
Big Ten eliminating the divisions.
Yeah. Call back sometime, Michael. All right. That could not be enjoyable for everybody to listen to. But I get it. What I did not know. So, all right. That's not Michael's fault. I've had communication issues and technical issues myself. So that's just, we have to deal with technology. David, how you doing tonight?
It's a very imperfect thing, Mark. I'll tell you that much.
Yes, it is.
To the great Mark Rogers, hi, and how are you, sir?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Excellent. Want to jump in on a little bit. By the way, I'm noticing a lot of Team Up North fans in the chat. Do we have a lot more than we did a year or two ago? Because I didn't notice this many a year or two ago. Maybe I'm off on the count of their fans that have joined us in the last year or so, but I could be wrong.
I might be off as well, David, but I believe, I would like to know this for sure because I was taking a poll at one point. So maybe this gives me a good opportunity to say we are trying to figure out the fan representation of all the teams, of all the individuals, the viewers here, the subscribers at the Voice of College Football. So if you've not done so, please hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail and just tell me. And you can tell me a big, long story if you want. I enjoy some people's stories about how they became college football fans, but you simply need to just let me know who you root for. That's it. MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Let me know who you root for. I'm keeping a tally, and I believe, David,
yes,
if somebody held a gun to my head, I believe we have more Michigan fans here than Ohio State fans.
I'm going to have to go out and do some recruiting here, Mark. Even this thing up.
So.
Or sway it to the Ohio State side. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to talk a little Big Ten with you, and then I'll add a couple of things about the other conferences. I just want to start by saying, as far as scheduling goes, and to compare Ohio State to the team up north, let's be perfectly honest. If Iowa and Wisconsin played tomorrow, that would not be an ESPN classic. That would reek of 7-5, and it would not be a great game. Let's just be honest. That's the gap between a 6-6 team and a 7-5 team, maybe, or maybe just two 7-5 teams.
Yep.
Neither one of those teams are going to make it forget 95 Nebraska or 0-1 Miami. They're just not. Neither one of them are that good. So I'll bottom line it as best I can there. And if you put Notre Dame and Maryland on a neutral field, be a good game. I might lean a little Notre Dame, but I think Maryland's very good. I thought Maryland was going to go 8-4, 9-3. And actually, I wouldn't have been surprised if Maryland finished third in the East if we're going to pick the order of the East before the start of the season.
Yeah. We had a previous caller who was certainly promoting Maryland, and I think that they're an improved football team. And I think what I saw against Michigan was a team that has gone from being a team that will flash a quarterback and like three receivers, maybe a really good running back. They've had those in the past. I haven't really watched enough to tell this Hemby how good he is, but maybe one linebacker who might play in the NFL and like a couple defensive backs that will play in the NFL and some really bad like defensive tackles that can't stand up against the run, and just really 4 defensive players that can be worked around, of course, and a bad offensive line with some skill and speed on offense. They have a legitimate defense. Now, I'm not going to sell it as a great defense, but they can legitimately play.
Right. I mean, my thoughts on Maryland coming in is I thought, Little Tua would have a decent year because he had the second or third best group of receivers in the Big Ten. They did have a lot of starts coming back on their offensive line, which actually looked pretty good against the team up north. Remember, they were running the ball very well early in that game. And, they moved the ball well early up until a very controversial interception that was gifted to the folks up north, and it was a gift. Yeah. And that kind of changed the momentum of that football game. So, I would say that the gap between Notre Dame and Maryland is just not that great. That's the bottom line that I'm going with. I would say this about the Big Ten East. I think right now it's looking like a very solid 2-team race with. I think Penn State's a hair ahead of Maryland. Maybe not a hair. I should say they're a little bit better than Maryland. Yeah. How do you see the differential between, let's say, Maryland? First of all, do you agree with the top two, and then that they've separated themselves? And that where do you see the gap between Maryland and Penn State?
Well, if we didn't have a preseason perception of Ohio State, Michigan, and everybody else, I don't know that I would separate Penn State from Ohio State and Michigan.
Okay. I mean, you do know that Penn State still has Sean Clifford as their quarterback, right?
Yes, they do. They do.
Okay. I mean, to be honest with you, I think they should be starting Drew Aller. I think they'd be in far better shape going forward with Aller than Clifford. We know what Sean Clifford is.
They probably should be starting Will Levis right now is who they should be starting.
Didn't Will Levis show a little regression last week, Mark?
Oh man, if Will Levis was the Penn State quarterback right now,
I like Aller's potential, to be honest with you. Sure, I mean, remember
Will Levis is going to be a first-round NFL draft pick next year.
Okay. We'll see if the team that takes Will Levis is okay.
Not just from one person. I'm hearing this like consensus.
I'm not real optimistic on Will Levis's future as an NFL quarterback, but I'll be okay. There's been a lot of bad quarterbacks taken in the first round. That's all I'll say on that point. I mean, I think right now, I'll say this about Penn State. I like their running game. I think they have really good talent on defense, but Penn State offensive line play has still kind of been questionable for me. And you tell me what they have on the outside. Do they have a difference maker on the outside? Do they have anything close to a Dotson or a Hamler or even a, Gesicki or a Freiermuth at tight end?
Well, they got this Brenton Strange at tight end. I think he's a good player. And they got Parker Washington at wide receiver. He's their number one guy. And I just think these guys need opportunity, and they're getting them, and they're making plays. They played in a monsoon. They played under difficult circumstances in terms of creating offense against Northwestern. They turned the ball over 5 times.
I agree with that. I don't put a lot of stock in that game. I don't.
Yeah. And that shows you how bad Northwestern is. They got 5 turnovers and they scored 1 touchdown. But yeah, I'm not selling Penn State to be Ohio State and Michigan. I simply was making the point that if we didn't have these preconceived notions and we were just going off of what's been on the field this season, that Penn State went to Purdue and won. They clocked Auburn by 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, Auburn's got a coach coaching on borrowed time right now.
Yeah, but they still almost beat LSU.
Yeah, I've got the under on 3 years at Brian Kelly at LSU. By the way, yeah, that was never a culture fit to begin with.
Yeah, I have a little more faith in Brian Kelly than that.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I mean, I would say this. I think Penn State is a solid top 10 to 15 team. But I still think that there's a decent gap between Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. And I'm saying this to the Team Up North fans. Listen, I think you guys could be a better offensive football team than you were a year ago. But I'm still not convinced your defense is on the level where it was at a year ago. And I know we've talked about that before. I will say this. I think Maryland does pose some problems for Ohio State in the future. That passing game, I will say this about the Buckeyes. The one thing that's concerning me right now is the secondary. I think the linebackers and the defensive line are better, but Denzel Burke at corner is having a lot of struggles right now and might need to be replaced. The 2 things I would do for Ohio State is replace Burke at corner and obviously give them a healthy JSN at wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm really surprised by that because going into the season, he was considered the best corner.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that might have been like naming the valedictorian at summer school. So I don't know if that carried with it a whole lot of merit. But yeah, they could upgrade that position and probably stand to get JSN back. And I think those would be the 2 areas that could maybe put them in a lot better shape going to the home stretch of the schedule. I'll say this. The West is just going to be crazy. It'd be interesting, by the way. You can't transplant Penn State to the West, but if you could, you know what I mean? How would that
win the West?
Yeah.
Sure.
It certainly would make a championship game a far more interesting game to want to watch, too.
Yeah. Yeah, we might see something like we did last year.
Yeah. Oh, you think that Penn State would get mopped in a title game?
No, I'm saying the way it's currently configured.
Oh yeah. The way it's currently configured, I definitely agree with you on that one.
Our buddy Dependent Fanatic with his comment on the screen here. Dependent Fanatic, we know you know we love you, but and appreciate your support here all the time. But Michigan doesn't have significantly a better roster than Penn State. No.
Yeah, I just feel that they're a better football team, and I think catching them at home, I actually think they're 7 to 10 points better than Penn State.
Well, that's not that significant, is it?
No, it's not huge. I think they beat him by at least 10. I would see like a 27-17 kind of game in that one. Maybe 31-21.
Yeah, okay.
If I had to pick it.
Yeah. We're going to see that next week, right?
Yeah, that schedule for them is coming up. Did they have Minnesota before the team up north? Because I think they had Minnesota, team up north, and then Ohio State. They had a 3-game run right at that point, I believe. I don't know if you have it in front of you.
I will here in a second. So
I did want to get to the ACC real quick, and I also had a Pac-12 question for you too, Mark. To the ACC, did Clemson make a statement this week? I know you were talking about the ACC being a little bit more up in the air than you thought.
I'm a big fan of what Clemson did Saturday. I watched the game, and it was competitive for the first half, and then I think that they imposed their will, and they were the much better team in the second half. Of course, they're not going to run away. They're playing a quality team. They're not going to, outscore them 35-0 in the second half, but they outscored them from the point in which they were down 10-6 until the game was basically over. They outscored them 24-3, and they just shut down their run. They just shut them down. They just shut them down, throwing and running, and it started with shutting down their run, and they moved the ball reasonably well.
Yeah, I thought that was probably their best performance of the year so far. You'd have to easily say, especially considering it was a solid team they beat. I think that I would be real surprised if they go forward, lose one ACC game, and win the conference. I would not be shocked, and I think that's probably good enough to get them in.
Yeah, it should be.
Question about the Pac-12. Looking at the way Dorian Thompson-Robinson played at UCLA, who would you say right now is the best quarterback in the Pac-12?
Who, the best quarterback in the Pac-12? I would take. See, this is, again, where I don't know if anybody else wrestles with this, but I think we all do. Caleb Williams is supposed to be the best quarterback in the Pac-12.
Right.
Based on what I've seen, it's really close between, well, then you got Cameron. No, it's really close between Michael Penix and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, based on what I've seen with my eyes. And I know Cam Rising's a really good player, but I
was going to ask you if he's still in the equation, Mark.
He's not. I wouldn't seriously consider him number one, but he's really good. He's close. I would tend to go with those two, DTR and Penix, Caleb Williams Rising 4. And I'd love to see Cam Ward play. I didn't see the Oregon game. He threw an awful pick 6 that sealed the loss. They had a chance to take the lead late, and he threw just, a ball similar to remember the interception that Graham Mertz threw, the pick 6 to Ohio State, who was at McAllister, where it
wasn't quite a pick 6, but it was.
He took it down to like the 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
Where you can't underthrow the out. You need to leave it out there on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
He threw a ball like that, but I haven't seen enough of Cam Ward. Of course, he was in FCS play, but he would be another guy I want to see. And of course, Tanner McKee, who's a little tough to evaluate because what's around him is so bad.
Well, that USC UCLA, we may have an old school USC UCLA tilt late in the year where maybe we can kind of settle that quarterback question and have a classic one. In is that the Rose Bowl, by the way? USC UCLA, or is that at the Coliseum?
I don't know. I believe it's at the Rose Bowl.
That's going to be an interesting one late in the year. Bet our Pac-12 guys are going to love that one.
Can you imagine if they were both undefeated?
Wow. Yeah, imagine that. What if you get old school? USC, UCLA undefeated, Ohio State team up north both undefeated, going into those games. That would be
that could be a Fox doubleheader, noon and 4.
Yeah, Klatt and Gus would do the, obviously big noon from Columbus. I wonder who would get USC and UCLA on the late tilt.
It would be the better of the two broadcasting teams. You know what broadcasting team I love is I can't think of the guy. He used to be at ESPN. He's a baseball guy.
Oh,
shoot, I cannot think of his name.
Now McDonough's for ABC.
No, he's a Fox guy. I'd have to look him up, but his partner's Brock Heward. Those two guys, I think, are exceptional.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't mind Brock Heward. I think he's pretty good.
Oh, I think he's really good.
Yeah, I like him.
And I love Klatt, too. It's just I really like the play-by-play guy with Brock Heward, too.
Yeah, I've always been a big Klatt fan. Okay, one last quarterback question since you brought up Will Levis being a first-round pick, and I'll let you go here, Mark. Or the experts are saying Will Levis is a first-round pick.
That's not me.
Okay. Would you take Hooker from Tennessee or Levis right now if you had to have a quarterback?
Hooker.
Yeah, is that even close?
The NFL scouts look at different things than we look at. I'm
True.
looking at who's the better quarterback at the collegiate level, and it's Hendon Hooker.
Yeah, he's been playing really well.
Yeah.
All right, Mark. Well, as always, a pleasure to talk college football with you. And, I wanted to touch some of the other bases and other conferences. And as always, good to talk to you, my friend.
Thanks, David. Always
take care of yourself. Uh-huh.
And we'll remind David, I know it's getting too late, and it has nothing to do with the time. It has to do with just being worn down to a frazzle. I could tell when the words don't come out too well. That's when it's time to hang it up. But we'll remind David and everybody else here in the chat that we've got our Ohio State live show Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Then I had a business call when they said 10 in the morning. I thought, my goodness, that's just at the brink of me being coherent enough to understand anything or explain anything. But we've got the Buckeyes live at 11. Then we've got Oklahoma live at 12:30 Eastern, Michigan, Florida State, Miami, 5, 6, and 7 tomorrow. And right now, we got and bring my level background so we can have a conversation.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, that's good. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I guess I dropped my laptop and I guess my mic broke.
Okay.
So now I'm on my phone. So
the problem is me hearing myself.
Oh, okay. All right. So with your list, go ahead.
Okay. See, that's the problem. We're hearing
What's that?
On your speaker.
Oh, hold on.
We're hearing reverb.
Oh no. Let me.
And I wish I could tell you how to correct that, but I have no idea what you have going on now.
So you're hearing me on. You're hearing echo then.
I'm hearing me echo.
Oh, okay. Let me.
All right, let's hear from Tim. Let's get Tim on here. And before we get to Tim, thank you so much, Joshua, for the contribution. Thank you so much. Joshua says Clemson goes undefeated in the regular season. Georgia sucks. All right, Tim, what's going on tonight?
You must be tired, Mark. I just want to make sure I heard everything correctly from you. That last conversation was a bit interesting. Actually, before we get to that, sell me on Syracuse. You got them pretty high. I'm trying to fit. That's the one that sticks out to my face going, okay, you got Syracuse at 7.
Yeah.
What has Syracuse at 7?
Well, I think beating Louisville, Purdue, Virginia, and there's somebody else in there besides their Wagner win. Of course, that's inconsequential.
That has that Murderers Row has them at 7.
Nobody's played. See, this is the issue: is everybody cherry picks the teams that they want to hit me with, and they don't realize hardly anyone's played more than one good team. Hardly anybody. And if anybody considers more than one good team on a schedule, they don't consider them because obviously once somebody's lost, then this is what we hear all the time. We hear, well, they're no good. Why are they no good? Well, because they beat them. Well, they're no good. Well, because they lost it. And you play this merry-go-around game. So really nobody has that impressive of a resume right now. Nobody really does. Is Ohio State's resume impressive? No. Is Georgia's? Yeah, they beat Oregon. They killed Oregon. That was impressive. It's Alabama. Yeah, they finally beat a good team, Arkansas. And they get this Texas win that's by 1 point. They should have lost the game.
And then Kansas's resume. I mean, it's a great story, but they're at 2.
Okay. I know this is coming around to USC.
No, hey, Mark, trust me. I remember. Listen, my screenplay is going to be. It is going to have you at that bus stop with tears after that 79 game. I know. Deep down, you try to be unbiased. I'm staying out of that. I'm not even going to argue USC at all. USC is what it is. I'm not going to argue that one today.
Well, you guys were all patting me on the back a couple of weeks ago because USC was number 2. This isn't about USC going to number 2 and then they did something wrong to drop. They didn't do anything wrong. But Arizona State, not being a very good football team, has added to their resume. It's almost negatively impacted their resume. Oregon State, looking worse, has impacted their resume. Stanford continuing to look horrible impacts their resume. All that has impacted USC's resume. Fresno State, that's not a good win anymore. That's impacted their resume. What we think of Fresno State now versus what we believed that they usually are, okay, they're different. They're not good.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that goes into this in terms of the thought process of resumes not just being added to each week, but the previous portions of those resumes changing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, Iowa,
Maryland,
and
Iowa.
Maryland was out there starting quarterback, weren't they, though?
No.
Did he go out?
At the last bit of the game.
Well, they lost by 7.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it was also
I don't want to talk SC
with 1 minute left in the game.
Yeah, I don't want to talk SC. I'm not the 10. I'm fine with 10. I think that's what it should be. I'm curious about Syracuse and Kansas.
Kansas is beaten. Okay, Kansas is beaten West Virginia.
Yeah.
Houston by 3 scores. Iowa State, good team, played Baylor tough to the end of the game. Who else has Kansas beaten? Who did they just beat last week? They beat somebody in the Big 12. Yeah. Iowa State. They got one other significant win. Why is it escaping me right now? Duke's 4-1.
But
West Virginia.
I guess we just need to wait for these things to shake out to like have these teams play like 8 or 9 games and actually play, because a lot of these wins everybody's getting against mediocre teams. I don't it just seems very subjective. Which bad teams are better is what I'm hearing. Which bad teams are better?
I never claimed that it was completely objective. It can't be. It's impossible to be completely objective.
Right.
I've only claimed that it's logical. At least it makes sense.
Well, I mean, we have to make predictions on bad teams and which bad teams are better than other bad teams. And I don't know. I'm looking at these, like, I don't think Iowa State is incredibly that good. I don't think that West Virginia is a very good team at all.
Okay. Who is USC beaten? It's
Let's not make about. I don't want to talk about USC. Let's leave USC. Let's leave USC out of it. This is not an argument saying move to USC up. I'm fine with USC at 10. Absolutely fine with it there. I'm just looking at some of the other teams that, I say Kansas is too high and Syracuse. You said to call in if you had any discrepancies, and I do what you do. I went through your list and I was like, that's cool, okay. And then I saw two and I went, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. And then I went through who they played and said, I'm just not seeing it. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah, and I really believe, Tim, that you're not going to be that impressed with anybody's resume at this point, because I'm not. When I go through it and I think, how in the world are they number 4? But then I compare them and I cross check. I go through it, and when I finish, I'm like, okay, now compare number 1 versus number 2, and then compare 2 versus 3, and compare 1 versus 3, and like nobody has that great of a resume. Alabama's beaten. You know who I thought right out of the gate had a great resume for the time was Arkansas. They beat Cincinnati and South Carolina the first 2 weeks of the season. Well, obviously the one fallacy in all this, not in the way I do it, just in the process of doing this for anybody, is what one of the callers brought up tonight, is that when you win one of these games, then it makes the team that you beat look bad. So first 2 weeks of the season, Arkansas has beaten Cincinnati and South Carolina. Well, then everybody's saying, well, how good Cincinnati and how good South Carolina? Well, we don't know. They haven't played anybody except they lost to Arkansas. So you have to go into this making some kind of assessment of how good the teams are just by educated guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get more data points, and so we really know who they are. Like I said, a number of times, my favorite line last week was UCLA, welcome to the 2022 college football season, because they had shown us nothing. They beat a bunch of high school teams, and then they finally played somebody.
All right. Well, okay. So we could agree that basically nobody's played anybody, and that's why these rankings look a bit wonky.
Well, anybody is, that they've played few good teams.
The best win I see is the Georgia win over a really good Oregon team and blew them out. That is probably the most impressive win I've personally seen all year.
I agree. I don't think necessarily they beat the best team, but in the manner in which they beat them, put that together, the dominance and the opponent, and that's the most impressive win in college football this year. Yes.
Correct. Yeah, I don't think Oregon's anywhere near the top team in the country, but they are a very good team that got handled. So that's the one win really out there. I mean, someone could probably, I'm sure there's 1 or 2, maybe more out there.
Well, Alabama beating Arkansas this past weekend, that's a good win. That's a really good win.
That was a good win, but again, it wasn't as decisive as what we saw. So that is a solid win. And again, there have been some good wins. It's just there
aren't that many of those.
That's why it's just so murky. I mean, I looked at that who Syracuse has played, and I'm just trying to figure out,
Oklahoma State beat Baylor Saturday, and so I think Baylor's a good team. But if you want to play devil's advocate, because I get this all the time, then somebody's going to say, who's Baylor beaten? How good are they?
We don't really know how good Baylor is.
Iowa State, that's their best win. I'm just believing my eyes that Baylor's a good team. I know how good they were last year. I know what they've lost and know what they've gained. I believe they're a good team. We're going to have to see them play all these other teams in the Big 12. But for right now, they've only beaten Iowa State. And that's really all they've done. And they took BYU to overtime and lost the game. But still, I'm getting Oklahoma State credit for beating what I believe is a good Baylor team.
But Oklahoma State, USC and Oklahoma State have a common opponent in Arizona State. And did you watch the USC game, Mark?
No.
Right. Because I heard you. That's a great segue into my next one. You said that DTR, if I heard you right, you said that Penix and DTR are and are the best quarterbacks in the Pac-12.
No,
and
that's not what I said.
Oh, I heard. Well, you were talking to Dave. I thought you had said that they are the best in the Pac-12, and that Caleb Williams is not in the conversation.
No, that's not what I said.
Oh, I missed. What did you say?
I said this is where you have to throw a lot of different angles into this. I said if we go based on what we think, based on last season, based on recruiting rankings, based on a lot of other things, Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the Pac-12. But I said, based on what I've seen this year, based on how well they're playing, based on what I saw, especially at the Rose Bowl last weekend, and then putting Penix's Michigan State game out there, and I know Michigan State's got an awful secondary. I'm talking about his ability to run and throw. They're the two best quarterbacks I've seen so far.
Okay, but you didn't watch the USC game Saturday?
No, I've seen USC play Oregon State and some of the Stanford game and some of the Fresno State game.
Okay, because I've watched almost every down of both those. I mean, so I'm assuming you didn't watch DTR play in the South Alabama game.
No,
because he didn't look good there.
I've been watching him for 4 years, but no, I didn't. I've not seen him throw one pass until Friday night this year.
He had a great game Friday night, but if you've been following him, like you said, for years, you have two DTRs. It's kind of like
absolutely.
You have this DTR who just makes horrible decisions, and somehow loses the handle on the ball in the backfield and gives it these easy fumbles for unknown reasons without even contact. And then you have a guy like you saw on Friday night where he puts it all together and he's just an absolute machine. But I was just going to say him. I made a statement when David asked me that about quarterbacks in the Pac-12, similar to making these rankings. If somebody said, Mark, do you want Kansas as your number 2 team in the country? We're going to go play a tournament. I would say, hell no, absolutely not. I don't want Kansas. I want Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, and those 3. And then I'm really considering Michigan, USC, Tennessee, Oklahoma State, Penn State, some other Clemson, certainly. But no, I'm basing it on rankings. So I just made the comment based on what I've seen this year. But I know DTR and what he's done in the past. If somebody held a gun to my head, I'd take Caleb Williams to quarterback my team. Okay. All right. So your comment was from what you've seen of this year, and admittedly you haven't seen a lot of USC because USC literally on 4 third downs where they were missing one lineman was hurt and our right guard was out. There was pressure all over Caleb Williams. And on 4 occasions, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 4, I would say 90% of the quarterbacks in the country would have been sacked. Probably closer to 95% of the quarterbacks would have been sacked.
Okay.
But between strength, skill, agility, everything, and speed to get out of it, he picked up a first down every single time. He made NFL throws in that game that DTR could only dream of making. In DTR, in his entire career, I haven't seen DTR make the throws I saw in that game. So that's why when I heard you say that, I was just like, did I really hear that right? So,
well, we can make those kind of comparisons all day, historically and this year. David also asked me about Will Levis and Hendon Hooker. I believe that Hendon Hooker is a better college quarterback. He's playing better. He's been playing better for a long time, but Will Levis is going to be drafted higher.
No, I just mean overall. We're also talking the DTRs of what, 5th year senior, and Caleb's in his 12th game, I think.
Sure.
So I mean, there's also that to think about. Again, and then Penix, Penix is great with a clean pocket, and that's what he's had so far. But it looked like as soon as he had a little bit of people in his face, we started to see the shine come off the Penix power. Let's put it
And
that way.
we saw that at Indiana too.
So, whereas I've seen, the one thing I was surprised about Caleb Williams is he's not throw as well that I've watched on the run as I thought he might do.
Yeah.
I've seen him make some inaccurate throws when he's on the run, but I mean, I've seen guys in his face. I've seen him take hits. I've seen him do a lot with both his feet and his arm that I just honestly, I'm just assuming you haven't seen a lot of them this year, because Penix is doing great when he has a nice, if you give Caleb Williams a nice clean pocket, he's made thrown dimes as well. So I just don't think there's any comparison between Penix or DTR, but I guess this year will play out and we'll see who has the better season.
Yes, we will. Absolutely.
All right, Mark.
Thanks,
Just want to
Tim.
check in.
Appreciate you being here. Everybody, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 on the left coast. Pac-12 chat. Tim, Tony, and the rest of the crew. It's always fun. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Good night.
All right. Boy, I've been on here way too long. Let's get through these two. I should have gotten off here a long time ago. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Hello? Going once? Going twice? Hello? All right. Last call of the night. We got to Real MVP, usually the first caller of the night. What's going on, man?
Up for once, Mark. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing just fine.
I was looking at your rankings, and
Yes.
everybody accuses everything of SEC bias. So I thought I would run it by you. You've got 7 SEC teams ranked. Is there a case of SEC bias in your poll?
Probably. There's bias in the poll. Yes. I don't know what bias it is. See, that's the thing. So let everybody hear this loud and clear. There is bias in the poll, because that I was even explaining to our buddy Chris, who was the first caller, that even his computer has bias. Whatever, he can't even explain how he comes up with his rankings, because he pulls them from somewhere else and then he tweaks them or whatever he does. He never has answered my question how he comes up with those. But I was even trying to explain to him that his rankings have bias. And he's like, how do you know? And I said, well, did you have rankings after week 1? And he's like, yes. And I said, well, then there has to be bias, because how did you evaluate all those wins? If there's no bias, then after week 1, all the teams that won would be ranked number 1, tied. And then all the teams that lost would be ranked number 65, tied for 65. And that would be your whole ranking. Unless you wanted to order them, the team that won by the most, the team that won by 58 is number 1, the team that won by 54 is number 2, the team that won by 49 is number 3. And otherwise, just to have rankings, you have to have bias. But the thing that I can't answer is I don't know what my bias is. So because I've pulled out all the bias that I could possibly pull out of myself to rank this, but there's still everybody has bias. And I'm not even talking about being a fan or being you're biased toward Kentucky. I'm biased toward Ohio State. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about you could watch a football game and I could watch a football game of 2 teams we could care less about. We could watch the Utah-Washington game. And at the end of the game, you would have a different perception and evaluation of those 2 teams than I would. Because you like Utah or Washington? No. Or because I do? No. Just because we're different people that saw different things and looked at it differently.
Yeah, but I think if you are aware of the bias and try to take it out as much as you can, it makes for a more accurate poll.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
The hidden underlying point I was trying to make is there's this, everybody doesn't like the SEC. Everybody thinks the SEC is overrated constantly.
Yep.
But the fact is the SEC is still the best conference, has the best teams, and should have the most teams ranked.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's not the bias. The only thing we can say isn't biased is the results on the field. And the results on the field out of conference games shows that the SEC is the best.
And here lies in the next fallacy in rankings, my rankings, anybody's rankings. So what's going to happen now? SEC teams are going to be, well, the same thing's going to happen in the other conferences, but since we're focused on the best conference that had the best performance against the other conferences before they started playing each other, what's going to happen? Teams are going to start beating other teams in the SEC. That's going to, who knows, drop them in the rankings, knock them out of the ranking. It depends what you want to do with them. But I had all sorts of arguments with people, 7-8 weeks deep into the season last year, because I remember Mississippi State and Arkansas and all these teams where, you could draw this round robin of teams that beat each other in the SEC West. And you can either come to the conclusion, well, none of them are any good, or they're all really good and they shouldn't get punished for losing because somebody's got to lose the game. And the reason I opt to give them more credit is because if we go back to the non-conference games, they won most of them.
Right, and I think Auburn is a perfect example this year of what you're talking about. In my opinion, Auburn might be the 45th, 40th best team in the country, but in their division, where almost, if not every team has a legitimate case to being one of the 25 best teams in the country, they could lose every game in their division and still be better than, every team in the Coastal?
Yeah, I would love to see Auburn play in the ACC Coastal.
Oh, yeah, that would be a fascinating experience. It's almost as fascinating as Duke, Georgia Tech. Isn't that game for first place in the Coastal this week?
Yes. Well, basically, with some other teams, North Carolina.
Anytime Georgia Tech wins that game, they get ranked.
So I do think, I'd have to list out all the teams and tell you for sure, but most likely that, yes, the entire SEC West, except Auburn, are the 25 best teams in the country. Even though I may not rank them that way because of the resume part of it, those 6 teams are 6 of the top 25 teams.
Yeah, exactly. What is everybody's saying? Florida. Florida is just, they're the dumpster fire program. They should cancel the rest of the games because they're going to lose every game.
Yep.
I don't understand how they even won a football game, but they did beat Utah this year, right?
Yeah, they did.
And Utah's a legitimately good team. I think the AP poll has them at 11. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How does that make sense? Yeah, because unless Florida is actually pretty good, that's the only way that makes sense. But I think it's hard for people to understand. Florida could be the 11th or 12th best team in the SEC and still go beat the other conference's third, second, or first best team.
There's another fascinating one. Let's send Florida out to the Pac-12.
Yeah, and they already beat Utah. What was it? BYU last year went 5-0.
Yes.
Against the Pac-12.
Yeah.
So it's crazy what these non-conference matchups do and how our perception of those non-conference games seem to dwindle over time, when in my opinion those should be the most important games. But as we play conference games, they become the least important games.
Yeah, when you think about it, yeah, exactly. When you think about it, what has Utah done? Utah may be the 11th best team in the country. I'm not saying that they're not. What have they done since this Florida game to be ranked that high? They beat Oregon State and Arizona State and like some FCF school. Like, I don't.
Well, here we go. I pulled up the AP poll. They are the best one-loss team in the country according to the AP poll.
Yeah, but I don't know that they are.
I don't believe they are. I don't believe they're better than Oregon, Kentucky, NC State, Wake Forest.
I don't know that they're better than some 2-loss teams in the country. I don't know that Arkansas is not better than Utah.
What about Baylor?
Baylor, yeah. So for some reason you like when every time you talk, like the first 5 words are muffled and then it kicks in. Anyway, yeah, Utah lost to Florida. And I understand the argument, they were playing on the road, they probably would have won at home, but that's college football. That's sports. You play either on the road or you play at home. Anyway, that they played in the swamp. They probably would have won at home. Obviously, they made a stupid play at the end of the game where they could have won the game. But regardless, the ball was at the 2 or 3 yard line and the game was up in the air. It's not like they went down there and won by 17 points. So they didn't put the game away. That the game was precarious one way or the other, and they blew it. They lost. And they've beaten Southern Utah, San Diego State, Arizona State, and Oregon State since then. So I don't know how that warrants the 11th best team in the country. I think I have them barely in the top 25 at 24, I believe. Is where I have them.
Yeah, I don't think they're the best one-loss team in the country.
Who's the best one-loss team in the country?
According to the AP for Utah.
Yeah.
If you look at their loss, even if you just go by who they lost to, it's not as good as a loss as Oregon. Oregon lost to the top 3 team in Georgia. Kentucky lost to Ole Miss, who Ole Miss is at 9. NC State and Wake Forest both lost to Clemson, who's in 5th.
And Kentucky, you take your boys, Kentucky. So they lost a very excruciating loss against Ole Miss. So as you pointed out, they're number 9 team. And Kentucky also beat Florida in the swamp by 10 points.
Exactly. So I think Utah is an interesting case study to watch because everybody just assumes Utah's this great team and they're going to compete for the Pac-12. And I think they're top 4 team, but I don't know if they're going to even make the championship game at this stage. I don't think it's penciled in.
The point in all this is after a few sure things, we could bring up all sorts of teams. Is Utah better than Arkansas or Mississippi State or Ole Miss? I don't know.
I don't think they're clearly better than any of those teams. They could beat all of those teams, but they could lose to every single one of those teams you just mentioned.
That's my point. There's so many teams out there that, we could throw against a wall. NC State and Penn State and Oklahoma State and Baylor and Oregon and Utah and all these teams.
Right. In my opinion, 5 to 45, 50, it's really fun.
Yeah. Yes, it is. All right, man.
The final thing I'll say is you all were talking, kind of dissing on my boy Will Levis. I'm looking at the CBS Sports article that came out one day ago.
Yeah.
The headline is Will Levis goes number 1 overall. So.
Yeah, I got you. I wasn't dissing on him. This is the statement I made. It all started with our guy David Greenshield was saying that the backup quarterback at Penn State, Drew Aller, should be the starting quarterback. And I said, well, guy that probably should be the starting quarterback at Penn State right now is Will Levis. So it started from there.
I got to defend my quarterback,
Sure.
for my team. He's a great player, best player Kentucky's had since Randall Cobb. So,
okay.
Get some sleep, Mark. Hit the like and subscribe button. Let's try to get Mark to 38,000 subscribers.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Thanks, man. All right. I am definitely not getting sleep. There's way too much I got to get done, but appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. We got a packed Wednesday, as we always do. It starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time with Ohio State Buckeyes Live. We'll see you then. And whoever kicked in with the super chat, thank you so much. We want to honor, of course, all the super chats. That's Kyle Pickett. Thank you so much for that, Kyle. Appreciate you. Mark, as of today, who wins in your matchup, Florida or Florida State? Who wins a Florida State game? You know, Kyle, if you would have heard the conversation I just had with the real MVP, there you go. That's exactly it. It's a coin flip. Who knows? There's 40 teams in the country that are basically inseparable, and those are 2 of the 40. So wherever they're playing the game, there you go. They'll win by a field goal. They'll win the Vegas line, the 3-point advantage. All right. See you Wednesday.